Crap! This was the only thought in Sonny's head as he awkwardly fell backward, allowing the pincer to close right in front of his face with a loud clack. The jagged, chitinous blades were so close that he could clearly see bits of mud sticking to their surface. Sonny landed on his back, narrowly avoiding the unexpected strike. The good thing was that he managed to avoid being injured or even killed. The bad thing was that he was sprawled on the ground, unable to quickly create distance between him and the attacker. The massive pincer was still hovering above. Just as this realization dawned on Sonny, he desperately rolled to the side. In the next moment, the pincer lunged down, sending small tremors through the mud. If not for his quick reaction, Sonny's chest would have been caved in by that blow. He was just beginning to stand up when the pincer swiped sideways. Luckily, Sonny was ready. Instead of trying to dodge or block the attack, he went with it, letting the pincer collide with his outstretched hands and cushioning the blow. As his arms screamed in pain, Sonny used the force of the blow and allowed his body to be sent flying through the air. This way, at least, he would get out of the pincer's range. He might not have been taught how to fight, but one thing he knew very well was how to fall. Instead of breaking his neck or having the breath beaten out of him by the landing, he braced his body and nimbly rolled before stopping some distance away from the ambushing monster.
I take it back, Sonny, though, remembering his sarcastic critique of heroes' battle rolls. Rolling is an integral part of any respectable monster fighting technique.
Then he looked up, trying to ascertain the situation. In front of him, the attacker had finally shown itself. It burrowed from under the mud, casting a vast shadow over kneeling Sonny. Its tiny eyes were full of rage, hunger, and malice. It was one of the pincer monsters he had spent so much time observing. Towering over him at almost 3 meters in height, the bulky creature moved its mandibles and produced a jarring, piercing screech.
Why aren't you devouring the giant carcass with the rest of your buddies, you crab bastard?
However, the answer to Sonny's indignant plea was rather obvious. The monster seemed to be in a rather bad shape. Half of its 8 scythe-like legs were broken, and there were cracks in its thick carapace, each oozing with viscous azure blood. Additionally, he was missing one of its 2 pincer arms, which seemed to have been torn off entirely at the shoulder. If not for this pathetic state, the creature would have had no need to hide in the mud hoping to catch easy prey. It could have just followed the other monsters and joined on the feast. Sonny was just unlucky to stumble directly upon its ambush. He had relied too much on the scouting abilities of his shadow, forgetting that it wasn't much more observant than an awakened human. It was also weightless and inaudible. That's why the monster did not react when the shadow had passed over its trap a minute earlier. On the other hand, Sonny could also consider himself lucky. By the same logic, he would not have been able to dodge the creature's sudden attack if not for its crippled, slowed state. But pondering on his luck could wait for later. Right now, Sonny had a far more pressing thing to do, namely, try to survive.
Get back here, he ordered the shadow and jumped to the side.
In the next second, the space he occupied a moment before was torn apart by the attacking monster. Its heavy pincer crashed into the side of a coral pillar, sending crimson shards flying in every direction. Sonny caught his balance and continued moving. He was hoping that the bulky, heavily armored, wounded creature would not be able to match his speed, but unfortunately, it turned out to be surprisingly agile. Its scythe-like legs pierced the mud behind him, and the pincer was already flying through the air again, threatening to decapitate the young man at any second. Sonny ducked, dodging the pincer, and finally caught a second of reprieve. His eyes darted around, desperately searching for something to use as a weapon. Almost instantly, he noticed a long, smooth, sharp bone left behind by some unknown creature sticking from the mud. Without slowing down, he bent down and grabbed the bone, pulling it out with one forceful tug. The bone was almost 1.5 meters long, ending in a narrow, sharp tip. It was almost like a spear. The problem was, even with the added length of this makeshift spear, Sonny's range of attack was still shorter than the monster's. He also doubted that it was capable of piercing the hard carapace. In short, he had to get close and aim for one of the cracks in the creature's armor. However, he didn't dare to, at that short of a distance. The monster could easily crush him into a paste by using just its weight and hulking frame. A crazy idea entered Sunny's mind. A bit shocked, he momentarily couldn't decide whether it was the product of audacity or foolishness. Either way, he wasn't insane enough to actually consider it. At that moment, the pincer lashed out again. This time, Sunny was a little late to evade, and as a result, a sharp pain pierced his left leg. It was grazed by the edge of the pincer. The puppeteer's shroud held, not allowing the monster to draw blood, but the force of the impact was enough to throw Sunny tumbling to the ground. There was no time to recover. As his eyes opened wide, Sunny understood that it was time to act crazy. So, instead of trying to dodge, he stopped moving and allowed the monster to grab him across his torso with the pincer. Immediately, a terrible pressure descended on his ribs. Sunny felt as though he was going to be split apart, but his armor, received from defeating an awakened tyrant, resisted the crushing bite of the monster's pincer. Every muscle in his body tensed, delaying the moment when his insides would be turned into mush. In the next second, Sunny's shadow fell from above, wrapping itself around the puppeteer's shroud. With the protective properties of the armor enhanced, he was able to better resist the pincer's pulverizing embrace. Sunny and the monster appeared to be at an impasse. The young man couldn't free himself from the monster's grip, while the monster could not kill the prey by cutting it in halves with its pincer. They stared at each other. Then, an insane fire ignited in the creature's eyes. It clicked its mandibles and raised Sunny in the air, bringing him closer to its mouth, obviously intent on biting his head off.
Why is everyone trying to eat me? Am I that tasty?
Sunny didn't struggle as the monster brought him close to its mandibles. He knew he only had one chance to live. In the last moment, Sunny allowed the shadow to flow from Puppeteer's shroud onto the sharp bone he was still clenching in his hand. Then he gathered all his strength, leaned forward, and thrust the bone forward with as much power as he could. Guided by his hand, the dark bone spear shot forward and pierced through the creature's tiny eye, sinking in deep. The other eye of the monster narrowed. Gritting his teeth from the unbearable pain in his ribs, Sunny twisted the bone, trying to do as much damage to the creature's brain as possible. For a couple of seconds, nothing happened. Then he felt the pressure on his body diminishing. The pincer opened, letting Sunny fall down. As he hit the mood, the hulking monster crashed to the ground too. The bone spear was still sticking from its head, bathed in the streams of azure liquid. Sunny moaned and drew in a raspy, painful breath.
You have slain an awakened beast, Carapace Scavenger. You have received a memory, Azure Blade. Your shadow grows stronger.
Sunny just turned being eaten into a killing blow, and that shadow is only getting stronger. Share this episode with someone who would love this story. Then let us get back to the nightmare. Sunny was sprawled in the mud, trying to catch his breath. The subtle voice of the spell echoed in his ears.
Your shadow grows stronger.
Immediately, he felt a slight change. His body grew a little bit stronger, his vision a little sharper, his skin a little smoother. The change was minimal but apparent. Sunny muttered, "What was that?" He had a guess, and it was easy to confirm. Sunny summoned the runes.
Shadow Fragments 14-1000.
Previously, he only had 12 of the mysterious shadow fragments, with no knowledge on how to acquire more. Now it seemed that the process was automatic. He only had to kill an enemy to absorb a part of their shadow and enhance his own core. More than that, the number of fragments he was able to receive wasn't directly correlated to the number of slain enemies. After a bit of thinking, Sunny came to a preliminary conclusion. Dormant soul cores gave him 1 fragment, while awakened ones gave 2. However, only enemies he defeated directly, more or less, counted. Killing the Mountain King's larva, a dormant beast, had given him 1 shadow fragment, finishing off the veteran slaver, a dormant human, another. Mountain King itself was an awakened tyrant, which meant that it had 5 awakened cores. With each giving Sunny 2 shadow fragments, he ended up with a total of 12. And now, after killing the Carapace Scavenger, he had 14. Interestingly, he didn't receive any fragments from the deaths of Shifty, Scholar, and Hero, even though they perished as a result of his machinations. It seems he had to finish an enemy off with his own two hands to absorb a part of their shadow. Well, or at least by summoning an ancient dead god. The process was quite similar to how normal awakened increased their power, with the only difference being that the steps of extracting and consuming the corresponding material, soul shards, were skipped in favor of instant absorption. That meant that shadow fragments could not be stored and subsequently could not be bought or traded. He won't have an opportunity to receive them as a reward for completing missions, providing services, or selling various spoils. If Sunny wanted to grow stronger, his only option was to fight and kill. Sunny sighed and muttered, "No peaceful life for me, I guess." Previously, Sunny thought that he at least had the choice to choose a relatively safe path. Many awakened never left the confines of human citadels and never faced nightmare creatures, choosing instead to perform various jobs in the dream realm just as they would in the real world. They received payments in the form of soul shards, which were simultaneously the fuel of one's progression and the universal currency inside the citadels. Sunny was never set on pursuing such a life. But not even having a choice was sort of irritating. Luckily, there was a bright side too. Without the need to use soul shards to strengthen his core, he would be able to spend everything he earns freely and without concern. After all, after he kills an enemy and absorbs the shadow fragments, the soul shard would still be there, ready to be collected and exchanged for something Sunny might need in the future. That would effectively make him twice as efficient in terms of earning and spending, which was not a small advantage. Additionally, there was the matter of the shadow core. Since both Sunny and his shadow were tied to it, strengthening the core would not only increase Sunny's power, but also enhance the shadow. So, if he were to use it to further empower himself, the actual effect would be stacked, producing a twofold enhancement. So, for each shadow fragment he collected, Sunny would actually be able to rip twice as much benefit as an awakened would from a soul shard. Sunny remarked, not bad at all." The future was bright. Provided he survives and gets the opportunity to even have a future, of course. Sitting up, Sunny moved his eyes and found the cluster of runes describing his memories. Azure Blade. Had he finally gotten a weapon?
Memory Azure Blade, memory rank awakened, memory type weapon, memory description on this forgotten shore only steel remembers.
Oh, interesting.
Not very informative, but interesting. Sunny summoned his new weapon, and a sharp, light sword immediately appeared in his hand. It was about a meter long, including the handle. The blade was straight and single-edged, ending in an angular tip. It was forged out of azure steel with a beautiful layered pattern. Deep inside the steel, white sparks could be seen. The crossguard was minimalistic and simple, offering almost no protection to the wielder's hands. If Sunny knew his way around cold weapons, he would have called it a tang dao. However, he had no idea about such things. All he could gather was that the blade was single-edged, which meant that it was probably meant for slashing and cutting as opposed to piercing, and that the handle was long enough to accommodate two hands. Also, the sword was pretty. He summoned the shadow and made it wrap itself around the azure blade. Immediately, the steel became bluish-black with a scattering of white sparks. It looked like a starlit night sky. Sunny stood up and waved the sword a couple of times, getting accustomed to its weight. The sharp edge whistled as it cut the air. Sunny remarked, "Well, now I finally look like a real awakened." After that, he cast a gaze at the corpse of the Carapace Scavenger and grimaced. This part was not going to be pleasant. After some time, he managed to break open the cracked carapace and cut away a few strips of tender pink meat. He also did not forget to extract the radiant crystal from the beast's chest, the soul shard. Without much hope, he tried to absorb the shard, remembering how it was supposed to be done. Just as he expected, nothing happened. Sunny muttered, "They're really of no direct use to me." With a shrug, Sunny places the shard and the meat in a makeshift rucksack he weaved from black seaweed and looked at the sun. The day was still young. He still had a good chance of making it to the distant hill before the sea came back. However, his left leg was banged up in the fight with the scavenger beast, so walking wasn't as easy as it was before. He gritted his teeth and began limping. Hours passed. Due to his bruises and increased vigilance, Sunny's progress slowed down considerably. He was sweating and grinding his teeth, feeling pain with each step. What's worse, the further he reached into the labyrinth, the more confusing and entangled the paths became. Even with the shadow's help, he constantly had to backtrack and struggled to move in the right direction. Sunny cursed under his breath, muttering, "Crap, crap, crap." If nothing changed, Sunny would not reach his goal, which meant that he'll be crushed to death by the returning sea. Not allowing himself to think about dying, Sunny tried to walk faster. However, he couldn't be too hasty. Making a wrong turn would have taken precious minutes away from him, so he had to choose the way carefully. Additionally, missing to notice another ambush could end his life directly. Sunny spat a frustrated curse, just when he was beginning to feel desperate. His shadow suddenly saw something that momentarily sent Sunny into a stupor. Some distance further down the path, beyond a few turns, the corals widened, creating a small clearing. And in the middle of that clearing, someone was walking across the mud. The first thing Sunny saw was fair skin. A lot of skin. The tall, lithe girl was only dressed in a makeshift skirt and a crude brassiere, both made out of seaweed. However, it didn't seem to bother her. With a calm expression, she stopped and looked back. The wind was playing with her short silver hair. It was Nephis, the changing star. In one hand, she was holding the end of a strange golden rope, and on the other end of the rope, Kasha, the blind girl, was carefully following behind. Gray sky above, black mud below, an endless sea of crimson in between. On this dreamlike backdrop, two beautiful girls were walking across the labyrinth. One was delicate and fragile, with blonde hair and cerulean, aimless eyes. She was dressed in a simple tunic with leather sandals on her feet and a cloak the color of sea waves draped around her shoulders. The other was tall and lithe. She had silky silver hair and clear gray eyes. Her revealing clothes were crudely made out of black seaweed, leaving her fair skin and athletic build exposed. She was poised, alert, and barefoot. A golden rope connected two girls together.
Wow, what a sight, Sunny thought. He suddenly regretted that he was not an artist. The picture just begged to be made into a painting. Wait, why am I thinking about that? People, I found people.
His heart skipped a bit. If Nephis and Kasha were here, then the orange light from before most likely had something to do with them, which meant that they knew how to get to the tall hill, which meant that Sunny didn't have to be crushed to death by the high tide. Sunny wondered aloud, so what do I do now? He wasn't the best at ingratiating himself to other people. In fact, he was the polar opposite. People usually instinctively avoided him, and that was in normal circumstances. This time, however, he had spent a whole of 4 weeks making sure that everyone in the academy hated his guts. Sunny muttered sarcastically, "Good job, Sunny." Still, he was at least useful. In this situation, an additional body was already a great boon when facing hungry monsters. And he wasn't just anyone. His ability to scout ahead alone was worth a lot. Surely they'll understand that, right? With a heavy sigh, Sunny stepped into shadows and hurried to the clearing. He reached it in a minute or so, hiding and observing the two girls before making a final decision. Helping herself with the wooden staff, blind Kasha slowly approached the middle of the clearing and extended her hand, finding Nephis and touching her on the shoulder. Cassie asked, "Why did you stop?" Nephis supported the blind girl and glanced at the sky. Nephis said, "It's getting late." An awkward pause hung between two girls. After some time, Cassie asked, "So you think we should turn back?" Nephis blinked and cleared her throat. Nephis answered, "Yes." Sunny was a bit amused by their exchange. Sunny thought to himself, what is she, a strong, silent type? Then he returned to his dilemma and grimaced. Sunny groaned inwardly, "How do I approach them? Damn, why is this so hard? It's not like I'm trying to ask them out on a date. I mean one of them, both of them. What am I thinking about? Just go and say hi." But then, if he suddenly appeared out of the shadows, not at all like a creep, how high was the probability of them getting spooked and attacking him before noticing that he was not a monster? Wait, why would they? To hell with this. Deciding on the safest approach, Sunny commanded his shadow to abandon its hiding place and move to a spot where Nephis could clearly see it. He could clearly sense the shadow rolling its eyes as it obeyed the order. As soon as the shadow started to move, Nephi's suddenly snapped her hand sideways. Immediately, a long sword appeared in it, cutting the air as it assumed a defensive position. Before the shadow could even take 2 steps out of its hiding spot, it was already pierced by Changing Star's gray eyes. The shadow froze. It seemed a bit startled. Kasha took a step back. Cassie asked, "Neph, what is it?" Nephi's didn't answer immediately, carefully observing the shadow. Then she simply said, Nephi's said, "There's a shadow." Kasha's doll-like face paled. Cassie stammered, "A shadow, scavengers." The tall girl tilted her head a little. Nephi's replied, "No, it's a human shadow." This was clearly not what Kasha expected to hear. With an expression of surprise, Cassie asked, "A human shadow? What is it doing?" Nephi's hesitated. After a while, she answered in a flat tone. Nephi's answered, "It's waving at us." After a whole minute of silence, Kasha finally found the words to react. Cassie exclaimed, "What?" Nephi spoke again. Nephi's repeated, "I said it's waving."
Yes, I know. I mean, why is it doing that?
Nephi's opened her mouth, then closed it again. Nephi's ventured, "I don't know. Maybe it's a distraction to lure us into a trap." At this point, Sunny decided that it was time to talk. He inhaled deeply, then said in a friendly tone. Sunny called out, "Actually, I just sent it ahead to make sure that you don't stab me with that sword before realizing that I'm human." Immediately, Nephi's turned her head, pinpointing the exact location where Sunny was hiding in a blotch of shadows. Her sword slightly shifted, aiming at the new threat. Nephi's demanded, "If you're human, why are hiding in the shadows like a creep?"
God admits I'm not a creep.
Sunny choked, but his flaw was merciless. He had to provide an answer, and a truthful one at that. Sunny admitted, "I mean, you're Changing Star Nephi's. To be honest, I'm a little afraid." Nephi's did not answer. Because of her hard-to-read face, it was almost impossible to determine whether she believed him or not. However, he included her true name in his answer for a reason. If he was some monster pretending to be human, he wouldn't have known it. Luckily, Kasha was more expressive. Cassie asked, "Are you the boy who sat with me in the cafeteria?" Sunny smiled. Meanwhile, Nephi's glanced at the blind girl. Nephi's asked, "Do you know him?" Kasha nodded. Cassie said, "I recognize his voice. His name is Sunless. He was in second to last place in the rankings, right above me." The tall girl frowned as if trying to remember. Then she asked, Nephi's asked, "The pervert." The smile disappeared from Sunny's face, replaced by exasperation. Sunny protested, "Oh, come on." Kasha hesitated and didn't answer. Sunny insisted, "Hey, I'm not really a pervert, you know. I just said a few things to a few girls. It was all a misunderstanding." Nephi's was silent for a few seconds and then finally dismissed her sword. Nephi said, "Okay, you can come out." Sunny limped out of the shadows, summoning his own back. It flowed to his feet and reattached itself, visibly shaking. The bastard was laughing at him. Stopping a few meters away from Nephi's, he raised his hands, showing that he didn't mean the girls any harm. Changing Star gave him an inquisitive look. Nephi's asked, "What happened to you?" She was referring to his limp, bruises, and overall banged-up look. Sunny sighed. Sunny replied, "Carapace Scavenger." Nephi's raised an eyebrow. Nephi's asked, "You managed to get away alive?"
Oh, you bet I did. Sunny subconsciously straightened his back. I didn't get away, I killed it.
To prove his point, he gestured at his rucksack full of delicious monster meat. Nephi's looked him over again, reevaluating her opinion of him. Now, there were hints of approval in her eyes. Carapace Scavengers were only beasts, but they were still awakened. With the addition of their mighty physique and natural armor, defeating one was not an easy feat for any sleeper who all had a dormant core. let alone someone from the very bottom of the ranking list. Come to think of it, it was even a bit too outstanding. Sunny lowered his eyes. Sunny muttered, it was already wounded." Nephi shrugged. Nephi conceded, "A kill is a kill, you did well." After that, she fell silent as though not planning to say anything else. Sunny also wasn't sure what to say. Luckily, Kasha came to the rescue. Cassie asked, "Are you seriously injured?" He shook his head. Sunny answered, "No, it's just that my ribs and leg are bruised. I'll be fine in a day or two. My armor is pretty resilient." He wasn't worried that they might be tempted to kill him to get the puppeteer's shroud. That was because memories were destroyed at the moment of their owner's death, so they only could be transferred voluntarily by a living person. Well, there was always torture and blackmail. But he doubted that any one of the two beautiful girls would stoop to that. Sunny cleared his throat. Sunny said, "Before stumbling on the scavenger, I was heading for the tall hill with the massive coral pillar on top. But after the fight, my speed decreased. Now I'm worried about not making it in time. Do you perhaps know the way?" Kasha smiled. Cassie said, "Actually, we spend the last days on that hill. We were just about to go back." Nephi didn't say anything, looking at the sky. Sunny licked his lips. Sunny asked, "Well, can I come with you?" They're not going to say no, right? The blind girl turned her head to her companion, a clear question written on her face. Cassie asked, "Neph?" Nephi lowered her eyes, staring at Sunny. After a while, she said, Nephi said, "No."
"The what?"
A problem.
"No problem," Sunny snapped. "What's wrong with you, princess? Can't you speak faster?" Feeling his heart beating wildly in his chest, Sunny smiled. Sunny breathed, "Well, all right." The rest of the way to the tall hill did not take a lot of time. With Nephi's leading the way, taking all the right turns at all the right places, there was no need to explore the labyrinth and backtrack after encountering a dead end. Additionally, there were no scavengers around. In fact, they could have moved ever quicker if not for Kasha, who walked slowly even with the help of her staff. Guided by the golden rope, she carefully explored the ground ahead before taking each step. The uneven paths of the Crimson Forest were not an ideal surface for a blind person to walk on. Sunny didn't say much, periodically casting an incredulous glance at the strange pair. No matter how he looked at it, Kasha seemed to be dead weight. Perhaps it was cruel to say, but in the merciless reality of the dream realm, misguided kindness was a sure way to end up dead. Before meeting and observing the girls, he still had hoped that Kasha's terrible flaw hid an unexpected and powerful aspect. But from what he saw, it wasn't the case. If she couldn't even walk properly, what kind of power was there to hide? Nothing could outweigh the ruthless fact that the blind girl couldn't protect herself and thus would only drag her companions down. One had to be a fool or not fond of living to allow that to happen. So, which one of these descriptions suited Nephi's? Somehow, he felt that neither did. The sunset was not far off when they reached the hill. After climbing it and approaching the massive growth of coral, Nephi's dismissed the golden rope and immediately summoned it again. This way, it was untied and appeared in her hands in a neat bundle. Sunny murmured, "Ah, so it's a memory." Sunny wondered what qualities the magical rope had. Soon, his curiosity was satisfied. Right in front of his surprised eyes, the length of the rope suddenly began to increase. Soon, it was thrice as long as it was before. Nephi's calmly tied both ends of the rope into loops and then threw one of them into the air, accurately coiling it around a prominent protrusion near the top of the coral pillar. Then, she tested if the rope would hold, swiftly climbed up and waved from above, giving Sunny the signal to follow. After hesitating for a second, Sunny approached the rope and grabbed it. He couldn't help thinking that this would be the perfect opportunity to cut his head off, with him helpless while climbing and Nephi standing on the top of the pillar. Yeah, the vivid picture appeared in his mind. Sunny told himself to stop being paranoid, trying to calm himself down.
"Stop being paranoid," Sunny thought, trying to calm himself down.
It's not that he was sure of changing Star's impeccable moral qualities. Instead, he was certain of one thing. If Nephi's really wanted to kill him, She wouldn't have needed to wait for an opportunity. She could have just cut him into ribbons whenever. Simultaneously scared and reassured by this, though, Sunny nimbly climbed up and joined Nephi's at the top of the coral mound. He then turned around and watched curiously, wondering how Kasha was going to get to them. The blind girl dismissed the wooden staff and approached the rope. Then she caught it in a hand, traced it down to the loop at the end, and placed her foot inside. As soon as she was done, Nephi's grabbed the rope and started pulling, lifting Kasha little by little until she had reached the top. She only had to grab Nephi's hand and make a step to join them. Sunny remarked, "Efficient." The coral mound was much larger than the circular stone platform of the giant knight's neck. In fact, it was almost like a small island. At the highest point of the island, hidden behind some coral blades, the girls had made a little camp. There were piles of seaweed to sleep on, strips of scavenger meat drying under the sun, and a fire pit. Sunny pointed to the makeshift fire pit. Sunny asked, "Was it you 2 nights ago? I've seen an orange light in the distance." Kasha's face darkened. Cassie said, "Yes, this was the first time we made a fire, but it turned out to be a really bad mistake." Nephi sighed. Sunny raised an eyebrow, surprised. Sunny asked, "Why?" The blind girl touched her hair and turned her head to Nephi's. Cassie said, "At night, any light will attract monsters. We were attacked by scavengers first. And then. She paled and didn't finish. But she didn't have to. The memory of the colossal tentacle was still fresh in Sunny's mind. It seemed that he was lucky to meet these two when he had. If not, he was certainly going to make a fire tonight to roast some scavenger meat. Sunny said quietly, "I see." Nephi's looked at the sky and cleared her throat. Nephi said, "It should be fine now. We still have time before the sun sets." After that, she got busy making the fire. Kasha simply sat on a pile of seaweed and waited. Not knowing what to do, Sunny lowered himself to the ground and let his tired, bruised body rest. After a while, Sunny said, "I have fresh meat in my rucksack. Do you have water?" Kasha smiled. Cassie said, "Yes." After that, she extended an arm to him. A second later, a beautiful bottle made of patterned blue glass appeared in her hand. Cassie added, "That's a memory I have. It's always full." Sunny took the glass bottle and looked at it with envy. Sunny remarked, "An endless supply of water, huh? Sure beats my super loud bell." Then he added, "Thank you." He brought the bottle to his lips and greedily drank the cool, delicious water. Indeed, no matter how much he drank, the amount of water inside did not seem to decrease. Sunny asked, "Is it really endless?" Kasha touched her hair again. Cassie replied, "Not really. If you turn it upside down and let the water flow, it will stop in half an hour or so, but then it will be full again pretty soon." At that time, Nephi's was already done making the fire. Without looking up, she took Sunny's rucksack and opened it. Immediately, the soul shard rolled out. The tall girl looked at it, then at Sunny. Then she put the shard back in and pulled out the meat. Sunny became tense, preparing a misleading answer, but Nephi's did not ask. So he pretended like nothing had happened and continued his conversation with Kasha. Sunny said, "It's still a great memory. Getting drinkable water is not an easy task." Kasha nodded and smiled, pleased by his words. Soon, the rich smell of roasting meat permeated the air. At the same time, the sun was beginning to approach the horizon. A loud rumble came from somewhere beneath, and first traces of the black water began to appear between crimson walls of the labyrinth. Sunny looked east, where the skies were already growing dark. Then he uncomfortably shifted. Sunny asked, "Do scavengers come all the way up here?" Nephi's turned the meat and nodded. Nephi said, "Yes, but only at night. In the day, most of them seem to disappear." Sunny grinned, having an idea of why there weren't a lot of monsters in the labyrinth in the day. Sunny said, "That's because they all gather near the place I had been spending my time recently. You should have seen it. The tall cliff to the west of here. Well, it's actually a statue." Kasha opened her eyes wide. Cassie said, A statue, but for you to survive it should be."
Yes, it's a giant statue of a knight, at least 200 meters tall. He is missing his head, so I hid on top of the neck. Anyway, the day we were sent here, two sea creatures fought each other near that statue. When the water receded, I saw an enormous carcass lying there with hundreds of scavengers slowly tearing it apart.
Nephis nodded. Nephis said, "That would explain the lack of nightmare creature in the day. How long?" Sunny blinked. Sunny asked, "How long what?" Changing Star stared at him for a few seconds, making everyone feel uncomfortable. Nephis asked, "How long? Until they are done devouring the carcass?" "Oh, 1 day more too at most." Nephis turned away, took the meat away from the fire, and then quickly extinguished it. Sunny thought to himself, "There's definitely something wrong with that girl." The three of them ate in the dimming light of the twilight. The meat was juicy, tender, and indescribably delicious. It was better than anything Sunny had ever tasted, even back in the Academy's cafeteria. Of course, his excruciating hunger played a part in that. From time to time, they would pass the glass bottle to each other. When they were finished with their meal, the dark sea was back and the night was upon us. Everything was consumed by absolute darkness. Of course. Sunny could easily see both Nephis and Kasha. Under the cover of the night, Changing Star remained pretty much the same. The blind girl, however, allowed her true emotions to show, thinking that no one would see. She seemed much more lost, lonely, and frightened than she did in the day. As if trying to resist these feelings, Kasha said in a bright voice. Cassie said, "How about we formally introduce ourselves? I'm Cassie." Nephis glanced in her direction and shrugged. Nephis said, "Neph." Next, it was Sunny's turn. He exhaled, glad that they didn't ask his name directly. Most likely, he would still have been able to provide his human name. However, it also might have depended on the wording of the question. Relieved, he smiled and answered. Sunny said, "I'm Sunless, but you can call me Sunny." Sunny was slowly growing fond of having conversations in the dark. Without the burden of light, people were more relaxed and honest. It reminded him of the frequent blackouts that used to sweep through the city when he was a little kid. His family had no choice but to huddle together and spend a few hours doing nothing but talking to each other. Now, these dark hours had become some of his most precious memories. He was silent for a few moments and then said, Sunny said, "Since we're going to be depending on each other, should we share what abilities and memories we have at our disposal?" This was a logical suggestion. If they were going to fight side by side, knowing each other's strengths was more or less vital. Still, he noticed Nephis glancing in his direction with a guarded look on her face. Luckily, he was obscured by darkness.
"I'll start," Sunny said, both to show his sincerity and to reveal information about himself in a controlled manner. If he took the initiative to talk, he still had to tell the truth, but how much and to what extent was still for him to decide. If they were to ask and he had to answer, however, things would become unpredictable. "My attributes give me an affinity to shadows. I also have a slight affiliation to divinity. Lastly, I am prone to finding myself in unlikely situations."
Cassie listened carefully and then lowered her head as though embarrassed. Cassie said, "He is telling the truth. Not that we doubted your honesty."
"Why not? I spent so much time earning the reputation of a pathological liar."
Sunny cleared his throat and smiled, hiding his nervousness. Sunny asked, "Really? That's good to know. But why are you so sure that I am being honest?" The blind girl shifted a little. Cassie said, "Oh, that's my ability. I can see people's attribute. Sometimes I also receive visions. They can be about the future or the past. I mean, that's what I think. It only happened a couple of times." Sunny swallowed but then relaxed. Sunny thought to himself, "So she is an oracle of sorts. Luckily, her insight is limited to attributes. Otherwise, I'd be in real trouble. Still, I'll have to be careful around her." He finally realized how the blind girl had known about his birthday. The question was whether she had seen it in a vision of the future or in a vision of the past. If it was the former, was it safe to assume that he would certainly be able to celebrate at least one more birthday? Or did knowing the future actually affect it and changed it? For example, after learning that he was definitely going to survive, Sunny might have naturally relaxed and lowered his guard. Then he would die as the result of it. It surely seemed possible, right? That's assuming that the future could be changed. But maybe it wasn't. Then. Feeling his head hurting, Sunny decided to avoid this line of thought for now. Instead, he hid his inner turmoil and said in a friendly tone, Sunny said, "That's a good ability. Speaking of abilities, you have already seen mine. My shadow can move independently and explore. It can't affect the material world, but we share sight and hearing. That way I can spot danger before encountering it. The shadow is fast and stealthy. It can go anywhere and is almost impossible to notice. Oh. I can also see in the dark." He smiled, expecting the girls to understand and appreciate the utility of his shadow scout. Their reaction, however, was a bit strange. Nephi slowly turned her head in his direction, while Cassie became a bit pale and raised her hands to cover her chest. Sunny asked, "What?" Nephi's frowned and said in a flat tone. Nephi's asked, "Have you ever used your ability in the academy?" Sunny blinked. Sunny thought to himself, what a strange question. Then he said, "In the academy? Sure, of course. Why?"
What a strange question. In the academy, sure, of course. Why?
Oh, right, they think that I'm a pervert. Crap. Before the girls could say anything, he hurriedly raised his hand and blurted. Sunny blurted, "But I have never used it to do anything improper. You have to believe me." Fortunately, it was the honest truth. However, both Nephi's and Cassie looked skeptical. Sunny gritted his teeth. Sunny insisted, "I had more important things to do than whatever you're thinking about. I spent almost every waking hour learning how to survive." Nephi's raised an eyebrow. Nephi's observed, "I haven't seen you in class, even once." Sunny chuckled. Sunny replied, "Of course you didn't. While you were busy wiping the floor with other sleepers, I was studying wilderness survival." It was Changing Star's turn to blink. Nephi's asked, "Wilderness, what? There is such a course." Cassie seemed equally puzzled. Sunny said, "Yes, there is. It might seem like an afterthought for most people, but for an outskirts kid like me, who never went to a fancy school or saw a private tutor, learning how to survive in the wilderness is the difference between life and death. Without it, I would have drowned the moment we were sent to the dream realm." On a rare occasion, Nephi's looked completely bewildered. She rubbed her wrists and stared thoughtfully in his direction. Nephi's conceded, "I see. I didn't know." Sunny grimaced and struggled to keep the venom from sipping into his voice. When he finally spoke, his tone was light and amiable. Sunny said, "That's okay. It's natural for someone of your status not to know." When he mentioned her status, a strange smile appeared on the Changing Star's face, but in the end she didn't reply. Sunny continued. Sunny said, "Anyway, that's my ability. As for memories, I have 3. One is an armor, one is a sword, and the last one is a really loud bell." Now it was their turn to share. After a short pause, Nephi spoke. Nephi said, "My attributes give me an affinity to light and fire as well as a strong affiliation to divinity. I have 2 memories, a rope." While she was speaking, Sunny was looking at Cassie, trying to read her expression. From what he saw, Nephi's was telling the truth, but also not the whole truth. And judging by how hard the blind girl was trying to hide her true feelings, the secret hiding among Changing Star's attributes was not at all trivial. Sunny murmured, "Interesting." Nephi's continued speaking. Nephi's added, "And a sword. The rope is very sturdy and can change its length. The sword is very sharp and can protect its wielder against soul's attacks to a certain extent. My ability can be used to heal." Sunny didn't miss the wording of the last part. Can be used to heal. Does this mean that its main purpose was something else? He was pretty sure that Nephi's would not reveal all of her cards just like him. However, healing abilities were extremely rare. Having one that could heal but was not limited to healing, that would be simply unheard of. But then again, she was Changing Star, one of the few people in history to receive a true name in the first nightmare. If Sunny were to consider his own aspect ability, nothing seemed impossible. Sunny wondered about her aspect rank, then outwardly pretended to be excited, saying, "You're a healer. That's great. Having a healer among us is incredible luck."
I wonder what's her aspect rank is. Outwardly, he pretended to be excited. You're a healer, that's great. Having a healer among us is incredible luck.
Cassie nodded and smiled. Cassie said, "Neff is also an amazing fighter. You should have seen her dealing with those scavengers." Well, I also did not actually see it, but it sounded very scary. Sunny didn't need anyone to tell him how formidable of a warrior Nephi's was. He had seen it with his own two eyes, sort of. Actually, they were his shadow's eyes. Well, whatever it had instead of eyes. Meanwhile, Cassie sighed. Cassie said, "It's my turn. My attributes are nothing special. I guess I have an affinity to revelations and fate. My ability is like I told you before. It's not very useful. About my memories, I have 3, the bottle, the wooden staff, and this armor. You already know about the bottle. The staff can create wind. The armor is actually of the awakened rank. Neff gave it to me when we met. It has a very powerful protective charm." Sunny thought to himself, so, she's not only carrying Cassie on her back, she even gave away her only clothes, an awakened rank armor at that. What is Nephi's thinking about? The blind girl turned away and added after a while. Cassie added, "I used to be a pretty decent fencer. Before. Now I can't really fight." The last 2 sentences were obviously related to her flaw. Sunny and Nephi's, however, both chose to keep their secret. Despite the fact that knowing your companion's flaw was also important for cooperation and having each other's backs, sharing something like that demanded a very high level of trust. Right now, there was no trust between them. And even if there was, Sunny did not plan to ever share his flaw with anyone. Nephi's too seemed to have a lot of secrets. After a while, Sunny said, "Good, that's good. I think we have enough tools to survive, provided we use them right. I guess it's time to sleep." In the darkness, Nephi's tilted her head, listening to his words with a distant look. Nephi said, "All right, I'll take watch first." Sunny decided to be helpful and said, Sunny offered, "Actually, my shadow doesn't sleep. It can wake us up if something happens." Changing Star slowly smiled. Nephi's repeated, "I'll take watch first." Feeling a bit of coldness in her voice, Sunny sighed and shrugged. Sunny grumbled to himself, "Suit yourself. What are you going to watch, huh? You can't even see anything. Whatever. Just don't blame me when something giant swallows us in the middle of the night." Then he suddenly shuddered and muttered, "Wait, that was not a death flag, right? Right, of course not. No way." Sleep was avoiding Sunny. For a while, he sat silently in the darkness, listening to the calming rumbling of the waves. In this rare moment of respite, memories of the past few days came flooding into his mind. However, he was too tired to seriously think about anything. He was warm, full, and relatively safe. For now, that was more than enough. Soon, the rhythm of Cash's breathing changed, indicating that she fell asleep. Nephi's was guarding the camp, motionless, and as always, a bit distant. With her silver hair and fair skin, she looked like an alabaster statue. Sunny sighed. He struggled for a bit and then said quietly, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" Nephi's glanced at him and shrugged. The lack of an audible response clearly indicated that she remembered about his ability to see in the dark. Nephi said, "Sure."
Would it be too personal?
Sunny hesitated. Sunny said, "I thought you legacies come into the spell with a whole inherited arsenal of memories. I mean, that's supposed to be your main advantage. How come you only had 3? Nephi's was silent for a few moments. Nephi said, "Actually, I only had 2. The rope came from Cassie." He raised an eyebrow. Sunny said, "Oh, I see." Realizing that her answer wasn't really an answer, Nephi's thought for a while and added, "We lost most of our memories when my father passed away. The ones that remained were sold one by one over the years to keep the family afloat. This sword and armor came from my first nightmare." "So that's how it was." Sunny realized that the fall of the Immortal Flame clan might have been more thorough than he had thought. Still, something about it didn't make sense. Sunny said, "Surely, with your clan's reputation and standing, there were other ways to make money." Without any strong reaction, Nephi's simply said, "There were other reasons." Then she unexpectedly turned her head in his direction. Nephi's asked, "Can I ask you a question in return?" Sunny swallowed. Sunny said, "Yeah, go ahead." Nephi's tilted her head. Nephi's asked, "How did you know that I'm a legacy?" "What, that's it?" Sunny replied, "Simple. I heard Castor mention it. He was scolding other sleepers to make them treat you with respect." She gave him a nod and turned away. What thoughts were hidden behind her calm gray eyes, Sunny did not know. Some time had passed before he gathered enough courage to ask the question that he really wanted to ask. Before doing it, though, he made sure that Cassie was sound asleep and lowered his voice. Sunny asked, "Can I ask another question?" Without getting a negative response, he continued. Sunny asked, "Why are you burdening yourself with her?" A corner of Changing Star's mouth curled up slightly. Nephi's asked, "Why wouldn't you?" Sunny gritted his teeth, feeling the flaw pushing the truthful answer out of his mouth. Sunny said, "No." Honest, he wanted to believe to the last moment that the answer would be yes. But one of the things he had lost after the nightmare was the ability to lie to himself. Truth was merciless. It's not that Sunny did not pity the blind girl or didn't want to help her. It's just that he knew with certainty that it was simply not something he could do. He was barely able to save himself, let alone carry a helpless person across the dream realm. If he tried, they would just die together. Still, he couldn't help but be a little disappointed in himself. Nephi's, however, did not seem to judge him. She showed no reaction at all. After a few moments, she simply said, "Nephi's said, because I want to." Because she wants to. That was not the response Sunny expected to hear. He was pretty sure that she would either lecture him about virtue and compassion or disclose some obscure way to make Cassie's seemingly weak ability incredibly useful. However, she did neither. Nephi's expected him to believe that she was putting her life in danger, to the point of sacrificing an awakened armor-type memory, because that was something she simply wanted to do. Sunny exclaimed, "Ridiculous." At first, he dismissed her response as a non-answer, but the more he thought about it, the more disturbed he felt, because maybe it was actually the truth. Due to the circumstances of his life, Sunny had never really done things because he wanted to. Most of the time, he was doing them because he needed to. It was never a question of want. It was always a question of must. For him, this was a basic rule of life. But was it really? Or was it just a matter of perspective? Nephi's had certain advantages in her upbringing, but they weren't as ample as he had imagined. She had no wealth and no arsenal of relics to empower her. However, she did have a mentality that was different from Sunny's. It wasn't impossible for her to have the audacity to disregard need in favor of something as frivolous as desire, and do things that a normal person like Sunny would never do, like helping a blind girl simply because that was what Nephi's wanted to do. Perhaps that mentality was the greatest advantage of all. Perhaps that was the real barrier that separated legacies from the rest of them. That was a lot to think about. However, before Sunny could gather his thoughts, Nephi's suddenly spoke again. Nephi said, "My turn." Does she mean it's her turn to ask a question? Indeed, that was what she meant. Changing Star once again turned to Sunny and after a long pause suddenly asked. Nephi's asked, "Do you know the legend of Odysseus?" "A what? Who? What sort of a weird question is that?" Bewildered, Sunny shook his head. Then, remembering that she couldn't see him, Sunny said, "No." Nephi sighed and turned away. A few moments later, she softly said, Nephi said, "Odysseus was a hero in an ancient war. In the legends, some humans back then had powers akin to the awakened. Achilles with an aspect of indestructible body Diomes that was so ferocious even the god of war was wary of him, Ajax who was as strong as a giant. Odysseus was not the strongest and not the bravest. However, he was the most cunning." Sunny blinked, staring at the silver-haired girl. What? Where did this come from? Why is she suddenly so eloquent? Meanwhile, Nephi's continued. In the end, Odysseus' cunning ended the war and he prepared to sail home. However, the gods cursed him to endlessly wander the seas, never to return. Over the years, he survived one horror after another and lost all of his companions. Then shipwrecked, he found himself on an island where the beautiful fairy Calypso lived. Changing stars' ethereal, strangely wistful voice resounded in the darkness, creating an enthralling atmosphere. Sunny couldn't help but listen with the utmost attention. Nephi said, Calypso fell in love with Odysseus and invited him to her palace. For many years, they lived together in harmony. The island was like a paradise filled with all kinds of wonders, delicacies, and delights. As long as loving Calypso was by his side, Odysseus was even immortal. But the longer he stayed, the more time he spent sitting on the shore, looking at the sea with bleak eyes. Nephi smiled. Nephi said, in the end, Odysseus built a makeshift boat and abandoned the island, leaving all its delights, the beautiful fairy, and even his immortality behind. So, my question is, why did he leave? Sunny blinked. Sunny asked, what? What kind of a mind game was that? He even considered that Nephi's was mocking him, but it didn't seem to be the case. It looked like she was sincerely interested in the answer. Weirdo. He thought for a bit, and then said without too much conviction, Sunny ventured, maybe it was because he was far away from home. A fleeting smile appeared on Nephi's face. Nephi's mused, far away from home, all right. After that, she turned away and lowered her head, becoming like a statue again. It seemed like their conversation was over. Grumbling internally, Sunny lay down and tried to fall asleep. However, the image of bleak-eyed Odysseus kept appearing in his mind. After a while, he whispered. Sunny whispered, well, did he make it back home? Soon Nephi's replied, yes. He returned to his wife and son, and they lived happily ever after. Satisfied, Sunny smiled and turned on his side. When he was already half asleep, he heard Changing Star's quiet voice once again. This time, it was barely audible and aimless, as though not directed at anyone. Nephi's murmured, Odysseus was the first human to break the will of gods. In the morning, Sunny and Nephi's were the first to get up. While the sun was rising and the sea was retreating, they made a fire and began preparing a simple breakfast. With Cassia still asleep, they did not talk to each other much. It was like the last night's conversation did not happen. However, after some time, they somehow ended up discussing the plan for the next few days. Nephi's had some ideas. Nephi's said, with what you told us about scavengers crowding to the west, the logical step would be to start moving east as soon as we can. Of course, north and south are also acceptable, but that won't put as much space between us and the enemy. Sunny nodded, agreeing with that logic. Nephi's continued, we have explored to the east a little, but not enough to confidently make it to the next high point in a day. That's why the best course of action would be to spend today scouting a path to that group of cliffs over there and move the camp tomorrow. He sighed. Sunny asked, do you have any idea where we are? Would there be a human citadel to the east? Nephi shook her head. Nephi said, I've never heard of a region that fits the characteristics of this place. In any case, we have to move to find out more. We'll either find a citadel, encounter an unconquered gateway, or die. East is as good of a direction as any. Plus, it's the safest, because there's a horde of monsters to the west. At that point, Cassie suddenly sat up straight. Her eyes were wide open and her face was a little pale. She looked nervous and excited. Nephi's frowned. Nephi's asked, Cassie, what's the matter? The blind girl turned to them and smiled. Cassie exclaimed, a vision. I had a vision. Like a prophetic dream, Sunny thought, trying to come to terms with this new reality of someone being able to see the future, or the past. Meanwhile, Changing Star stretched her hand as though prepared to summon her sword. Nephi's asked, are we in danger? Cassie energetically shook her head. Cassie said, "No, it's not that. People. I saw a castle full of people." She smiled and pointed with her finger. Cassie said, "I don't know how far it is, but I'm sure that it's in that direction." Sunny and Nephi's looked at each other, not knowing whether to be glad or petrified. Cassie's small, delicate finger was confidently pointing west. In the ensuing silence, the smile slowly disappeared from Cassie's face, replaced by confusion. Feeling the sudden tension, she asked,
What's wrong?
Sunny sighed.
No, nothing is wrong. It's just that that direction is the one we wanted to avoid.
After some thought, he added,
That's where I came from yesterday. There's a lot of scavengers down there.
The blind girl's face fell. She gave a quiet, disappointed. Nephi's, who was quietly listening to them, gave him an indecipherable look and finally spoke.
Tell us more about the castle.
A shadow of the previous excitement returned to Cassie's eyes. With a serious nod, she began describing her vision.
I dreamt of a vast, ruined city built of weathered stone. It was surrounded by tall, impregnable walls. Various monsters were wandering its narrow streets. In the center of the city there was a hill, and on that hill stood a magnificent castle.
She smiled.
But there were no monsters in the castle. Instead, it was full of people. I'm sure that they were awakened. Some were guarding the walls, some were going about their lives without a care in the world. There was food, safety, and laughter.
Sunny remarked that it sounded great. If this castle really existed, then all of their problems would be solved. Sunny cleared his throat.
Did you see anything else?
Cassie frowned, trying to remember. Then her face cleared.
Yes, I saw Sunny leading me through the gates of the castle. That means we will make it.
A brilliant smile appeared on her doll-like face, beaming with so much joy that Sunny couldn't help but curl his lips. Inwardly, however, he was stuck on a certain detail of Cassie's vision. It was that, when talking about reaching the castle, the blind girl only mentioned the two of them. Was there some meaning behind it? Sunny turned his head a little and secretly glanced at Nephi's, trying to discern if she had picked up on that little discrepancy, too. Changing Star, however, was as enigmatic as ever. Without showing much emotion, she thought for a while and then slowly nodded.
Okay, then we will go west.
While the sea was still retreating, they had their breakfast and then spent some time planning for the journey and preparing to abandon the temporary camp. In the process, Sunny had a chance to get to know the girls a little better. It was then that he came to a sudden realization, which almost made his head explode from bafflement. That mind-blowing realization had to do with Nephi's. Back when they first met in front of the academy's gates, Sunny had formed a certain impression of the confident, distant girl. Later, her behavior and the different revelations about changing stars past only served to reinforce that impression. Nephi seemed to exist a bit apart from the world. She was mysterious, aloof, and rather cool. Her taciturn character and strange speech patterns made people interacting with her feel unnerved and rattled, often revealing more than they had been planning to. The less she talked, the more she seemed to know. That silent, indifferent confidence was arresting, and sometimes even oppressive. However, that impression turned out to be completely wrong. The actual truth behind the matter had nothing to do with being cool and aloof. After talking to her a bit more and observing their interactions with Cassie, Sunny almost fainted when he realized that Nephi's was simply an incredibly, ridiculously, painfully awkward person. It was as though she had no idea how to talk to people. Every time she tried to convey something, she would either use the wrong words or stumble in the middle of the sentence and fall silent. Her tone never matched what she was trying to say. Often, she would forget to put correct intonations in her speech, making questions sound like statements or vice versa. Added to that was the fact that, like many introverted people, Nephi's was not in a habit of openly showing her emotions. It's not that she didn't have feelings, it's just that she was really bad at emoting them. As a result, Her face always looked cold and neutral. That's why most of the time. She simply chose to talk as little as possible or not to talk at all. All of that added up together, then multiplied by her general weirdness, was ultimately responsible for creating the false image of a mysterious, unapproachable ice princess, when in fact, she was just shy and completely inept in communicating with people. After coming to that realization, Sunny tried with all his might, but still failed to stop himself from staring at Nephi's with wide eyes. He just barely managed to not let his jaw hang open.
What the hell? That's not in line with how a protagonist should be.
In his mind, Nephi's had definitely been the type of person to be the main character of any event. At the center stage, there were always confident, strong people like her and Castor. People like himself and Cassie, on the other hand, were relegated to exist far away in the background. Now, however, no, that line of thought was also wrong. The fact that Changing Star had problems with expressing herself and lacked social skills did not mean that she was not strong. In fact, it might have meant the opposite. She still achieved everything that she had achieved, but with the added layer of adversity, she was still dangerous. At that moment, Nephi's finally noticed that Sunny was staring at her. She looked at him and after a long pause asked in an emotionless tone,
What?
He blinked, extricating himself from this sudden flood of thoughts, and cleared his throat.
Nothing. I was just going to ask, when are we setting off?
Nephi's appeared to be thinking. After a while, she turned away and said,
Soon.
Sunny muttered that she really couldn't manage more than one word, could she? Utterly bewildered, Sunny hid his emotions and smiled.
Zav's all right then.
In the gray light of morning, they abandoned the tall hill and ventured west, retracing their steps from yesterday. Knowing the path, the small party made quick progress. Nephi's was walking in front, her sword arm ready to strike at any moment. A bit behind her was Sunny. This time, the responsibility of holding the golden rope and guiding Cassie along was entrusted to him. Of course, the actual person, creature. Leading them was his shadow. It scouted ahead, carefully observing the labyrinth for signs of danger. The labyrinth was just as it was before, confusing and seemingly endless. Crimson blades of coral protruded from the black mud, creating a vast, tangled forest. However, today something about it felt different. It wasn't long before the shadow stumbled onto a mass of hulking, hungry scavengers. Halt, Sunny whispered, observing the group of scavengers through his shadow. As soon as the word left his lips, Nephi's immediately summoned her sword. After studying the surroundings for a second, she turned her head and glanced at him with a question in her eyes. Kasha, meanwhile, froze in place and hesitantly raised her staff. Sunny counted the monsters. 1, 2, 3, 5. He cursed sharply under his breath. The hulking beasts seemed like the losers of the pack, similar to the one he had killed. However, their wounds were not as pronounced and terrible. Each of them was much more of a threat than the mangled one from before, and there were half a dozen of them at least.
There are scavengers on the path ahead, 6 of them. They're slowly moving in our direction.
Nephi's cast a gaze forward. There was a calculating look on her face.
They're done with the carcass.
Sunny thought for a moment and then shook his head.
No, I don't think so, but maybe there's not enough meat for everyone anymore, so some stragglers had no choice but to leave with an empty stomach.
Nephi's nodded and gestured to a nearby branching path.
We'll circle around them.
The 3 sleepers hastily moved forward and changed paths, giving a wide berth to the group of monsters. Tense and grim, they continued walking, trying to stay on course and not get lost in the labyrinth. However, in the next hour, they had to turn in a random direction again and again, avoiding other scavengers. The distance between them and the giant statue was not shortening at all. At some point, they were catching their breath near one of the numerous dead ends of the Crimson Labyrinth. They had no choice but to wait, since a large number of creatures was moving past their hiding spot. separated from them by a long length of a twisting coral passage. Sunny sighed and shook his head.
We can't go on like that. At this rate, we'll never make it to safety before sunset.
Cassie was the first one to react.
Maybe we should turn back.
That was a reasonable suggestion. However, Sunny felt reluctant to agree. Nephi shared his thoughts. With a blank expression, she said,
It will only get harder tomorrow.
She was right. By tomorrow, there would be even more scavengers flooding the labyrinth. Sunny asked what they should do. Changing Star tilted her head, thinking. After a while, she turned to Sunny.
Fight.
Fight against dozens of those monstrosities. Was she crazy? Sunny tried to hide his derision as he spoke.
I know that you are skilled with the sword, but have you forgotten that each of those things is a whole rank above us? We won't survive in a fight against many.
Nephi's nodded.
We avoid large groups, cut down smaller ones.
After a moment, she added,
If there's one or two of them, there's a chance.
Sunny wanted to retort, but couldn't find a good reason. In the end, he gave up.
Well, fine.
Nephi stared at him for a while. Then she suddenly asked,
Have you studied the corpse of the scavenger you had killed?
What was that supposed to mean? A bit surprised, Sunny shook his head.
I know.
He was too busy being in pain and trying to make it to safety before the sea returned. And why would he study a corpse? Sunny ventured that he thought Teacher Julius had mentioned something about this. After a short pause, Nephi spoke.
Scavengers have 3 weak points on their bodies. The first one is obvious. It's their joints. Anything that has to be flexible can't be too rigid. So, there's gaps in the armor above the joints. By targeting the joints, you can diminish their mobility and attack capacity.
Oh, so by studying a dead monster, one could better understand their strengths and vulnerabilities. This idea was so obvious that Sunny admonished himself for not realizing sooner. Meanwhile, Nephi's continued.
The second one is the same. It's where their torso connects to the carapace. If you manage to accurately hit that spot, you can heavily injure a scavenger and deal serious damage to its body. However, unless you succeed in severing its spine, the wound won't be fatal. It'll still be able to fight for a while.
Sunny couldn't help but notice that Changing Star's awkwardness seemed to disappear whenever she talked about things that she felt confident about, like ancient heroes, or killing things. He murmured that it was curious. The last weak point is on their back, approximately at the level where the eyes are. There's a slightly concave, discolored cavity in their armor. It is where several armor plates connect. The chitin there is comparatively thin. If you can pierce through it, you can destroy the brain directly. That will be a killing blow. Sunny thought to himself that it was good to know. However, that weak point was too high to be hit by a human. After all, scavengers were more than 2 meters tall. As though reading his thoughts, Nephi's added,
That weak point is very hard to target. Circling around a scavenger is almost impossible due to their size, speed, and the attack range of their pincers.
She looked at him and calmly said,
If we stumble on a single scavenger, I'll be the bait. My task will be to make it turn around and then restrain it, exposing the third weak point. Your task will be to kill it.
Sunny gulped.
What if there's 2 of them?
As usual, Nephi's paused before answering.
Don't die.
It wasn't long before they were left with no choice but to attempt a fight against a scavenger. Behind them, there was a long stretch of the labyrinth with no suitable branching paths for them to turn onto. Ahead of them, there was a small clearing with only one other passage leading out of it. Not far into that passage, a massive scavenger was moving slowly in their direction. Sunny quickly described the situation and waited for Changing Star's feedback. Without much delay, she gave him a nod.
We fight in the clearing.
After that, Nephi's gently guided Cassie to the wall of the labyrinth and helped her find a place to sit.
Wait here, we'll be back.
After some thought, she added,
Soon.
As Nephi's moved to walk away, Cassie grabbed her hand. Her face was pale and tense.
Nephews, be careful, okay?
Nephi's blinked and tilted her head a little. Then she smiled. She gave a quiet assurance that she would. With that, she and Sunny hastily headed for the clearing. By the time they got there, the scavenger was seconds from appearing. Sunny's shadow flew out of the passage and reattached itself to his feet. Without having to discuss things with Nephi's, he quickly hid in the shadows and waited there, hoping for a chance to attack. Nephi's, on the other hand, strolled to the center of the clearing and calmly stood there. Her shoulders relaxed and her back straight. An elegant longsword appeared in her hands, carelessly pointed to the ground. Not knowing what else to do, Sunny silently repeated her words. He muttered to himself, "Don't die." A second later, the scavenger walked into the clearing. When his tiny eyes spotted Nephi's, an evil light ignited in them. Without wasting even a second, the massive monster screeched and rushed forward to attack. Its huge pincer shot forward with terrifying speed, tearing the air in its path. Nephi's swiftly sidestepped, dodging the pincer, then leaped backward, removing herself from the path of the rushing monster. Simultaneously, her sword flashed in the air, cutting deep into the joint of one of the scavenger's front legs. Azure blood spattered on the ground. Of course, this small wound was too insignificant to slow the scavenger down. With surprising agility, it twisted and delivered a crushing sideways swipe. Nephi's, who just barely landed on her feet, had no choice but to deflect the blow with her sword. She managed to disperse most of the impact by holding the blade at the right angle. But the remaining force was still enough to throw her off balance. At that moment, the second pincer came down. Instead of trying to regain her equilibrium, Changing Star went with the fall and somersaulted over one hand, ending up distancing herself from the monster a bit. Her sword lashed out again. The follow-up attack followed almost immediately. However, Sunny did not care about the details anymore. The only thing he cared about was that, through this risky series of dodges and leaps, Nephi's had managed to circle to the opposite side of the clearing, forcing the scavenger to turn its back to the shadow in which he hid. Sunny thought that it was now or never. Gritting his teeth, Sunny lunged forward. Before changing, Star finished her last dodge. Before the scavenger's pincer crashed on her from above. Before Sunny had time to become scared. He closed the distance between himself and the monster and jumped with all his might, landing on top of its carapace. Then, he used all of his weight to thrust a hand forward. Azure blade shimmered into existence in his grip and was immediately swallowed by the shadow. A breath later, the dark blade hit precisely into the concave, discolorated cavity in the scavenger's armor. With a crack, the chitin broke, allowing the tip of the sword to sink deep into the scavenger's body. The monster shuddered and then heavily fell to the ground. Sunny was thrown from its carapace, landing in the mud with a roll. He breathed, wondering if it was really that easy. It was already over. As though to answer him, the spell's voice resounded in the air.
You have slain an awakened beast, Carapace Scavenger. Your shadow grows stronger.
Sunny was sprawled in the mud, looking at the sky. He didn't even have to catch his breath since the whole fight took less than 10 seconds from start to finish. No one was dead, wounded, or even bruised. Well, with the exception of the scavenger, it was completely out of his expectations. He glanced at the monster's corpse to make sure that it was actually dead, then summoned the runes and took a look at the number of shadow fragments in his possession.
Shadow fragments, 1000.
It was actually true. The mighty awakened beast perished just like that. And although Nephi's did most of the work, he was the one to deal the killing blow. He muttered, wondering why it couldn't always be so easy. Sunny got back on his feet and dismissed the azure blade. Then he remembered the words Master Jet had once told him, "No one can survive in the dream realm alone." Back then, he noted her advice, but didn't really believe it. After all, he had always strived to be self-sufficient, not allowing himself to depend on anyone. In Sunny's mind, this was the true meaning of strength. However, now he was beginning to suspect that this logic was flawed. Indeed, having someone to share your burdens meant the difference between heaven and hell here in the dream realm. If he was alone, fighting against a single scavenger might have been the end of him. Similarly, even though Nephise was far more skilled than Sunny, it would have been extremely hard for her to defeat the armored monster alone, being that its weakest point was out of her reach. But together, they had accomplished it with relative ease. The whole was greater than the sum of the parts. In other words, there was strength in numbers that surpassed individual power. In that sense, being able to depend on a group was not a sign of weakness, but on the contrary, an important facet of personal strength. Lone wolves would always be at a disadvantage. That was another lesson to learn.
It's not like I had much of a choice.
He walked over to Nephise and checked if she was okay. Apart from slight damage to her makeshift seaweed clothes, everything seemed to be all right. She glanced at Sunny.
Memory.
He shook his head. Nephise sighed. It seemed that she was a bit impatient to get herself a suit of armor of her own. If Sunny was a gentleman, he would have suggested to loan her the puppeteer's shroud for a while. But alas, he wasn't. That armor was extremely valuable and had cost him a lot. Plus, unlike Changing Star, the picture of Sunny wearing nothing but a seaweed loincloth would have been more disturbing than aesthetically pleasing. So he said nothing. Meanwhile, Nephise headed for the dead scavenger and said without turning her head,
Bring Cassie.
With a sigh, Sunny turned around and left the clearing. Soon, he approached the place where the blind girl was waiting patiently for their return. Hearing his footsteps, she flinched and raised her head.
It's Sunny.
Sunny wondered to himself how she had recognized him, and figured it must have been the way he walked.
Yeah, it's me. Everything is over. Come on, I'll bring you to Nephise.
Using the wooden staff, Cassie stood up and turned to him.
Are you guys all right?
Sunny smiled.
Of course, we dispatched that critter in no time. Didn't even get a scratch.
Cassie smiled with visible relief.
Good, that's good. Oh, right, the rope.
Sunny took the rope and guided the blind girl back to the clearing. On the way, he felt a bit weird. With the delicate girl walking behind him, he couldn't help but think of his little sister. As a toddler, she used to follow him around too, as though they were glued together. As the familiar pain stabbed him in the heart, Sunny gritted his teeth and tried to think about something else. It was all in the past anyway. Back in the clearing, Nephise was done breaking apart the scavenger's carapace. The shimmering soul shard was already in her hand. Without saying anything, she tossed it to Sunny. He caught the crystal and looked at her with surprise.
Why are you giving it to me?
Nephise blinked and stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then she said as a matter of fact,
I don't have pockets.
Sunny gave a quiet. Still a bit bewildered, Sunny put the soul shard into his rucksack. He wondered why she wouldn't just absorb it. He opened his mouth to ask the question, but she seemed to realize something and added,
We'll divide the spoils later.
Sunny conceded with an all right. Nephise, meanwhile, turned to Cassie and said after some deliberation,
I was careful.
Then she smiled.
Your shadow grows stronger, your shadow grows stronger, your shadow grows stronger.
Sunny was feeling somewhere in between of being ecstatic and peeved. Throughout the day, they managed to kill 3 more scavengers, each time with not much risk to anyone except for Nephise. The process was largely the same. After discovering the monster, he would hide in the shadows while Nephise would act as bait. Then, when the time was right, Sunny would stealthily approach and finish the fight with a precise strike of the azure blade. He was wondering if that was what being in the main hero's party felt like. To anyone else, maybe with the exception of Castor, dancing around a deadly awakened beast would have been a tall task, most likely ending with the dancer's death. Nephise, however, had managed to do it over and over again seemingly without too much strain. What's more, her performance was based solely on skill with no aspect ability involved. In that regard, Even Castor couldn't have done better. She was swift, calm, and precise. Every move she made was calculated and perfectly timed. She seemed to innately understand the flow and logic of combat, which gave her the ability to roughly predict what actions the mindless beasts would perform in the next seconds. Then it was just the question of physical prowess to evade and even manipulate them to a certain degree. Sunny had always known that skill and experience were more important than raw power, but by watching Nephi's, he vividly understood just how vast the difference between them was. Even though his divine aspect allowed Sunny to exert more strength and speed than Changing Star, in an actual fight, he would never stand a chance. Of course, he was also an important part of every encounter. His role as the finisher was not trivial, and not just anybody would have been able to accomplish 4 kills with 4 strikes. Even though Sunny was not taught any elaborate techniques, he was still a somewhat experienced fighter. He had good physical coordination, combat intuition, and, most importantly, a cool-headed mentality, not to mention the fact that they were only able to ambush the scavengers so effectively due to his shadow scouting them out in advance. All in all, it was an almost equal cooperation. Still, watching Nephi's fight was nothing short of sobering. Trying not to get too dejected, Sunny summoned the runes.
Shadow fragments 22 1000.
8 fragments today, pretty excellent. Currently, they were waiting on the edge of the labyrinth path leading directly to the giant statue of the Headless Knight. There was a group of scavengers between them and the statue, moving past without any haste. The sunset was near, but they still had time. Slowly, minutes flowed by. At some point, Nephi's gave the command to move. Helping Cassie along, Sunny followed Changing Star and quickly traversed the open space between the labyrinth and the statue. Now, they only had to get on top of it. However, it wasn't that easy. Scaling the 200-meter tall monument would have been hard in normal circumstances, but now they also had to somehow pull Cassie up. Leaving her behind until they were at the top would not have been safe. In the end, Nephi's and Sunny took turns pulling the rope every 20 meters or so. Cassie would hold onto the rocks and wait until they climbed higher, and then the process would repeat. It was slow and torturous, and by the end, Sunny's muscles were sore and almost on fire, but they managed to get to safety before the dark waters washed them away. As the night began to descend, the 3 sleepers sat in the center of the circular stone platform and rested. As they did not bring any materials to make a fire and it was already too late, there was no way to cook food. They ended up chewing on the strips of dried meat, passing the bottle of limitless water around. After some time, Nephi's gave Sunny a sign to take out the spoils of today's journey. He took out the 4 shimmering soul shards and put them on the ground. Without any discussion, Changing Star moved 2 crystals in his direction and took 2 for herself. Then she gave one of hers to Kasha. Sunny watched it in silence. By the time Nephi's and Cassie had absorbed their soul shards, he still didn't make a move to take his. After a while, he took another crystal out of the rucksack and moved all 3 to Nephi's. The silver-haired girl looked at him with surprise.
Don't you want to grow stronger?
Sunny grinned.
Of course I do, but these won't do me much good right now. It's no secret that you are the main fighting force of our group.
He sighed.
The stronger you are, the better our chances of survival will get. Plus, it's not a gift, it's a trade.
Nephi's raised an eyebrow.
Trade. What do you want?
Sunny deliberated for a few seconds before answering.
It's rather simple. I will give you these soul shards, and all other soul shards I earn on the way to that castle.
Then he looked her in the eyes and said,
In return, you will teach me how to fight.
Nephi's looked at him and contemplated. This time, she remained silent longer than usual. Sunny felt a bit nervous under her gaze, knowing that he was being evaluated. With Changing Star's skill and insight, it wasn't hard to imagine just how much she had gleaned from his battle performance. Both his current level and future potential must have been pretty much laid bare in front of her. Were they enough to make teaching him worth her while? After some time, she took the soul shards and nodded.
Okay.
Sunny smiled, congratulating himself on a successful deal. Not only did he receive a lot while not losing much, but he had also managed to create a bit of a favorable impression of himself in the eyes of Nephis and Cassie. As far as performances went, this was a great one.
So when do we start?
Nephis shrugged.
Now.
Now. Sunny glanced at the sun, which was already almost gone. Were they going to train in complete darkness? It wasn't really an obstacle for him. Changing star, however.
We will start with some words. That will be enough for today.
After hesitating a little, she added,
Cassie, you listen too.
Sunny and Kasia turned to Nephis, listening to her like two obedient students. Despite the fact that their age was more or less similar, both knew that, in terms of martial prowess, their companion had authority that was as beyond theirs as a dragon's might was beyond that of a worm. Nephis thought for a while and then said,
Mastery of combat can be divided into two aspects. One is body, and the other one is mind. Training the body is not easy, but it is rather simple. All you need is repetition and experience. In a fight, things happen too fast to consider every detail in the moment. That's why your technique must exist in your muscles and bones, so much so that it almost becomes an instinct.
She paused.
You can achieve initial results through repetition. Then, it must be cemented through experience. The more battle experience you have, the deeper a technique will be assimilated into your body. There is no other way. 1,000 hours of training won't be as impactful as one real fight. Only those who survive countless battles can be truly in command of the body.
That simultaneously made a lot of sense and no sense at all. On the one hand, the principle of improving through practice was quite logical. On the other hand, Changing Star's statement made it seem like all those lofty legacies with their years of training were nothing but harmless children. After all, no matter how good their tutors were, they had no real battle experience. But then again, she did wipe the floor with every one of them, excluding Castor, with no apparent difficulty. So maybe her statement was true. That, however, posed a question of its own. Just what kind of life had Nephis led to possess rich battle experience at the tender age of 18? He mused, wondering whether he should stop calling her princess. Meanwhile, Nephis continued.
Training the mind, however, is not simple at all. That is because, once you reach a certain level of skill, the mind is where the true combat takes place. The outcome is often decided before your body begins to move. And to master the mind, the first step is to understand the essence of combat. However, very few people truly do.
She looked at them and asked,
What do you think that essence is?
Sunny hesitated. The essence of combat, what might it be? If it was some other legacy, he would have been tempted to say something stupid like honor, valor, or duty. But he already knew that Nephis did not fit into the image of a noble aristocrat he had in his mind. She wasn't someone who followed empty words. After a minute or so, Cassie finally answered.
A victory.
And almost at the same time, Sunny said.
Survival.
Changing Star shook her head.
No.
Then she rubbed her neck and pierced them with a cold, fierce gaze.
The essence of combat is murder.
Cassie flinched and opened her eyes wide. Sunny frowned a little. Nephis, however, did not seem to care. In the same calm tone, she continued.
At the core of it, there is only this. You are trying to kill your opponent, and they are trying to kill you. In the end, one of you will be killed, and the other one will be the killer. Everything else is just noise.
Her words sank deep into Sunny's heart and reverberated there, causing something inside of him to resonate and awaken. Style doesn't matter. Weapons don't matter. Reason and intent do not matter. The only thing that matters is to be the last one standing. In this way, anything you do in combat must be viewed as only serving one of two purposes, either to kill your enemy or to prevent the enemy from killing you. Nephis lowered her eyes.
If you can understand that, you will have enough clarity to master the mind.
After that, Sunny couldn't fall asleep for a long while. He lay on the cold stone, looking into the darkness and thinking about what Nephis had taught them. He repeated to himself, repetition, experience, clarity. These were the 3 keys to becoming a fearsome warrior. All 3 were important, but the last one was the most vexing. Was it really how Changing Star had said? Was there nothing at the core of being a warrior than a cold will to kill? Intuitively, he felt that it was indeed so. This ruthless truth was, in a sense, an amalgamation of all his life experiences. After all, for someone like him, life was nothing but a constant battle for survival. Someone always won, and someone always lost. The former got to live for a few more days, the latter. No one cared what happened to them. Of course, life was life and combat was combat. To most people, they weren't one and the same. But what about the awakened? The sole purpose of their existence was to fight against the nightmare creatures. Very few could escape that fate after coming to the academy. Sunny allowed himself to think that he had escaped the fate of always having to struggle at the edge of survival. But now, it seemed like he had just exchanged one battle for another. This was an uncomfortable thought. However, if he looked at it from a different perspective, did it actually mean that he always had a crucial advantage? Most of those chosen by the spell were forced to somehow adjust to this merciless way of life, but he had always lived like this. Was he actually one of the few perfectly suited to be an awakened? With this thought, Sunny fell asleep. In the early morning, he was awakened by a piercing scream. Sunny was on his feet even before fully waking up. Somehow, Azure Blade was already in his hand. His shadow was hovering beside him, ready to either wrap itself around the sword in case he needed to attack or around his body, in case it was already too late for that. He tried to understand what was going on. Nephis was nearby, her longsword raised in a defensive stance. Cassie.
Where's Cassie?
Fearing what he might see, giant tentacles reaching for them from the darkness, he looked around. The eastern horizon was just beginning to show the first hints of dawn, adding a tiny shade of gray to the blackness of the world. In that blackness, there were no signs of danger. Finally, he saw Cassie. The blind girl was stumbling at the edge of the platform with a horrified expression on her face. With her blonde hair in a mess, she was stretching her hands out, clearly lost in space. Of course, there were no walls for her to find. The platform was open to the elements, and the only thing waiting for Cassie was a plunge into the dark, tumultuous waters. Before Sunny knew what he was doing, he was already running. That wasn't a very smart thing to do. After all, he did not know what had caused Kasia to scream and if there was some hidden danger nearby. Plus, it was still too dark for Nephis to see. His sudden lunge could have caused her to lash out with the sword before asking questions. All of these were good reasons to wait and observe first, but in an uncharacteristic and completely irrational manner, Sunny acted before thinking. He caught Cassie moments before she took a step off the platform and, holding her tightly in his arms, dragged the blind girl back.
I got her, Sunny yelled, letting Changing Star know that there was no need to stab him with a sword.
And then in a quiet voice, he said to Cassie,
I got you, it's all right, everything is fine, calm down.
He felt the girl's body trembling and looked around again, trying to understand what had scared her so much. But there was nothing. Nephis was listening to the sea for the same reason. After a few seconds, she asked,
Do you see anything?
Sunny helplessly shook his head.
I know.
He helped Cassie sit down in the center of the platform. While Nephis stood guard above them, he looked the blind girl over to make sure that there were no wounds on her body. Everything seemed to be fine. He noted with relief that she wasn't hurt anywhere. Changing Star looked down. Although her face remained indifferent, he could tell that she was a bit flustered. After a second or two, she asked in something that might have been her version of a calming tone. It sounded pretty much exactly the same as usual.
Cassie, what happened?
Magically, that did seem to calm the blind girl down a little. at least enough for her to speak in a quivering voice. Cassie extended one hand and pointed down.
The head I saw, O guards.
Sunny frowned and looked at Nephi's.
Did she see a vision of the past?
The tall girl was silent for a moment.
I don't know. It never happened before.
Both of them turned to Cassie, not sure what to do. Since there was no apparent danger around, they took turns trying to calm the horrified girl down. However, after that one sentence, she fell quiet and refused to speak again. Nothing seemed to help. After a while, Nephi sighed.
Let's leave her be for now. Maybe she needs time.
Sunny was about to retort, but truth be told, he didn't have any ideas either. In the end, he just nodded.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on her.
Changing Star, however, had other ideas. As the sun was rising and the surging sea was receding, Nephi's chose to give Cassie some space and led Sunny to the edge of the platform. However, she made sure to always have the blind girl in the periphery of her vision. Kasha sat hugging her knees. Her eyes were closed, but small tremors that periodically ran through her body betrayed that she was awake. Sunny's eye twitched.
Are you sure it's okay to leave her like this?
Nephi's gave him a complicated look.
Yes.
Then, after some thought, she added,
Cassie is strong.
Sunny wasn't sure how to answer. If Changing Star considered someone to be strong, then they most likely were. However, strong was the last word that came to his mind when he thought about the delicate, beautiful, blind girl. Wasn't she someone who constantly needed their help? But then again, there were different kinds of strength. Kasha was still alive and sane despite her debilitating flaw. How many people could have done the same? He conceded, if you say so. Then Nephi's made him summon the azure blade. After studying it for a while, she nodded and took her longsword out of the air. Despite its size, it was an elegant weapon. The narrow, double-edged blade was much longer than that of the azure blade, with an incredibly sharp, symmetrical tip. The whole blade, as well as the simple cross-shaped guard, and the pommel seemed to be made out of silver and reflected the pale morning light. The handle was tightly wrapped in black leather. Putting the two swords side by side, Nephi spoke.
Your sword can be used with one hand, but its true potential can only be revealed when held in both. It is created primarily for cutting and severing, hence the higher center of gravity. However, it can thrust as well.
Then she gestured to hers.
My sword is a bit more versatile. It is created for both cutting and thrusting, and it has a double edge. However, the principle of wielding these two swords is the same.
She took the sword in both hands, placing one near the guard and another near the pommel. Then, she performed a downward slash.
They are both leverage-based weapons. When held with two hands, one hand pushes. She pushed the sword down with the hand near the guard, while the other hand pulls.
The hand near the pommel simultaneously pulled the handle up, giving the blade a tremendous boost in speed.
This is how you generate force and perform powerful strikes. Now, your turn.
Sunny looked at his sword and gripped it with both hands, mimicking Nephi's pose. Then, he raised it and slashed down, making sure to enhance the force of the strike with his lower hand. Changing Star observed him.
You need to understand that a strike doesn't come from the hands. It comes from your whole body. Power comes from your feet, your hips, your core, your shoulders, and is only then transmitted to your hands, like this.
She demonstrated the downward slash again. This time, Sunny paid attention to the overall stance and movements of every part of Changing Star's body, as opposed to only the sword. He wasn't a novice to fighting. Instinctively, he already knew how to deliver a proper punch, even if, before, there wasn't a lot of strength in his body. The principles of striking with a sword were largely the same, so Sunny quickly understood the overall concept. He performed the simple downward slash a few more times. After each time, Nephi's gave him pointers and corrected his mistakes. Some time later, she was finally satisfied with his form.
Good.
Sunny smiled, proud of his achievements. Nephi's looked at him thoughtfully and nodded.
Now, do it 1,000 more times.
The smile froze on Sunny's face. He thought in disbelief, wondering if she had really said 1,000. He blinked.
I'm sorry, how many times?
Changing Star tilted her head and thought for some time.
Well, we don't have much time today, so yes, only 1,000.
Sunny let out a dry laugh, repeating ha, only 1,000, eh? Sunny forced himself to sound polite.
I seem all right.
As Nephi's walked back to sit with Cassie, he turned to the sea and raised his sword. He counted 1. The azure blade whistled as it cut the air. He raised it again. He counted 2. Push and pull. This is how you generate force. He counted 3. Strike with your whole body, not just your hands. He counted 4. As Sunny raised his sword and slashed down, over and over again, only one thought eventually remained in his mind. He repeated to himself, repetition, experience, clarity, repetition. By the time he was done performing 1,000 strikes, Cassie was finally ready to speak. With pretty much every muscle in his body sore, Sunny walked over to the girls and fell on the ground. After catching his breath, he looked at Kasia.
Cassie, do you feel better?
Several seconds later, the blind girl slowly nodded. Sunny murmured that it was a relief. He shifted and hesitated for a bit. Kasia didn't look too well. Her face was still very pale with a distant, dazed expression on it. Her body at least was no longer trembling. Sunny wasn't very good at talking to people, let alone placating them. He wasn't sure what to say. He cast a gaze at Nephi's and sighed inwardly. Who knew that one day he would turn out to be the most sociable person for as far as the eye could see? What a joke.
Can I have some water?
Cassie turned to him and scowled, as though confused by the question. Then, she suddenly gasped and opened her eyes wide.
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course.
She summoned the limitless water bottle and offered it to Sunny. He took it with a grateful smile and greedily drank a few gulps before giving the bottle to Nephi's. Eventually, it returned to Cassie.
You drink some too.
After she did, he awkwardly patted the blind girl on the shoulder.
Everything seems to be fine now. Did you dream of another vision? You can tell us if you want.
Cassie hesitated for a bit before saying,
I don't know. Maybe it was just a nightmare.
Sunny and Nephi's exchanged glances. They both doubted that what Cassie saw was a simple nightmare. After all, people usually did not dream in the dream realm. The blind girl, meanwhile, continued.
I don't really remember. It's all in fragments.
Sunny carefully considered his words, not wanting to pressure Cassie too much.
You can just tell us what you remember. Maybe we'll be able to make sense of it together.
Kasia sighed and tentatively nodded. After a long pause, she finally found the courage to speak.
At first I saw a boundless darkness locked behind 7 seals. Something vast was churning in the darkness. I felt like if I directly saw it, I would lose my mind. As I watched, terrified, the seals broke one after another until only one remained. And then that seal broke too.
She trembled a little.
After that, I don't know. It was as though my mind shattered into 1,000 shards, each shard reflecting its own image. Most of them were dark and scary. Some I have already forgotten. The other...
Cassie fell silent, remembering.
I saw the human castle again. Only this time it was at night. There was a lonely star burning in the black skies, and under its light, the castle was suddenly consumed by fire, with rivers of blood flowing down its halls. I saw a corpse in a golden armor sitting on a throne, a woman with a bronze spear drowning in a tide of monsters, an archer trying to pierce the falling sky with his arrows.
Finally, she looked up, her face full of horror.
In the end, I saw a colossal, terrifying crimson spire. At its base, 7 severed heads were guarding 7 larks, and at the top, a dying angel was being consumed by hungry shadows. When I saw the angel bleed, I suddenly felt as though something so precious that it can't be described with words was taken from me.
Her voice became quieter.
Then I felt so much sorrow, pain, and rage that what little remained of my sanity seemed to disappear. That was when I woke up, I think.
Nephis and Sunny remained silent for a while, trying to make sense of what Cassie had told them. Even if Nephis had an idea, she didn't show it. Sunny, however, was totally lost. He couldn't even begin to decipher the hidden meaning behind the vision, if it even was one. Previously, Cassia's vision about the castle was pretty much straightforward. It showed her a human fortress and even the direction in which it was situated. This time, however, her dream was disjointed, full of weird symbolism and vague, uncertain images, much more like a charlatan's prophecy than a vision gained through an aspect ability. Finally, he sighed.
Maybe it actually was just a nightmare. Your previous visions weren't like this, right?
Cassie silently shook her head. Sunny scratched the back of his head.
Well, people don't usually dream in the dream realm, but you do. Perhaps seeing a random nightmare once in a while is a side effect of your ability.
The blind girl turned to him, a faint relief written on her face.
You really think so?
He hesitated, trying to find the right words.
Why not? It's a possibility.
Inwardly, however, he felt uneasy. He thought to himself that a dying angel being consumed by shadows sounded ominous, and he should try and stay away from angels in the future. He reflected on what had become of his life, that a sentence like that didn't even sound insane anymore. With that, they were finally ready to welcome a new day. Sometime later, they were sitting on the western edge of the stone platform, looking at the scavengers below. Sunny's shadow was busy scouting a path to the next high landmark. Sunny muttered, wondering if there had always been that many. Sunny glanced at Nephis and shook his head.
No, there were much more. They seem to be almost done with the carcass. I doubt it will last until nightfall.
Which meant that by tomorrow, all these beasts would be roaming the labyrinth, making it hard for the 3 sleepers to make any progress. It would be best to leave today and put some distance between themselves and the horde before the scavengers were done with their feast. However, without scouting a path in advance, there was a chance of not making it to safety in time. Both options were risky. Nephis frowned, seemingly thinking the same. After a while, she said,
I don't want Cassie to spend another night near this statue. Let's leave now.
Sunny thought for a while, then opened his mouth to offer his own opinion. However, a sudden commotion below prevented him from speaking. Down at the bottom of the disappearing sea, amidst mounds of broken coral, the carcass of the giant shark-like monster, the remaining half of it to be precise, was almost stripped of meat, and between its white bones something was shimmering in the mud. 2 extremely large, luminescent crystals. Sunny's eyes widened. He breathed, "Are those?" He answered his own question. Yes, shards of 2 transcendent soul cores. Transcendent, 2 of them. Suddenly, he was simultaneously filled with greed and fear. Greed because of how rare and precious transcendent soul shards were. Fear because the giant shark turned to be a corrupted devil at least. One corrupted devil, if not stopped by a saint or a large number of awakened, could potentially destroy an entire city. Sunny belatedly realized that he was much closer to death on that first night than he had previously thought. He started to ask, should we? Nephis cut him off. Wait and listen. He stared at Nephis and then obediently listened to the distant, barely audible clamor of the scavengers. After a while, he noticed some disharmony in it. Nephis suddenly tensed up.
There.
She pointed in the direction of the labyrinth. After concentrating on it, Sunny was finally able to notice two massive shadows stepping out of a particularly wide passage. A second later, the creatures casting those shadows appeared in sight. Sunny gulped. He cursed under his breath, "Damn." The monsters looked like the scavengers, but not quite. To start with, they were much larger, towering above the surroundings at more than 3 meters of height. Their carapace seemed to be thicker. It was colored in deep black and scarlet, like an ancient armor drenched in blood. Here and there, vicious-looking spikes were growing out of the carapace, making their every move much more dangerous. Additionally, instead of heavy pincers, their upper arms ended with long, curved, terrifying bone scythes. Sunny felt cold sweat running down his spine. He thought in alarm, wondering what the hell those things were. Nephise tilted her head.
Monsters, I guess.
Nightmare creatures with one soul core were called beasts. They were dangerous and strong, but mindless. If they were able to develop or were created with a second core, they became monsters. Monsters were much more devastating and possessed some rudimentary, warped form of intelligence. They were the next step in a nightmare beast's evolution. And these two seemed to be bigger, deadlier versions of Carapace Scavengers. Sunny and Nephise watched as the two monsters approached the carcass. The scavengers were visibly afraid of them, rushing to get out of the way. Those who were too slow were mercilessly thrown to the side or cut apart by the bone scythes. Rivers of azure blood were flowing into the mud. He wondered what they were doing and whether they had come to absorb the soul shards. Finally, the monsters reached the carcass. Each of them took one of the shards. However, instead of absorbing them, they simply turned around and carried the precious crystals away. The scavengers made way. Following the shards with their little, hungry eyes, Sunny blinked and looked at Nephise.
Do we still live now?
Changing Star frowned and hesitated. A few moments later, she shook her head.
No, we'll go tomorrow.
Then she turned west and observed the retreating monsters.
Get your shadow to follow these two back.
Because of the shadow fragments Sunny had absorbed in the last few days, the range of shadow control has increased a little. However, it was still far from being enough to explore deep into the labyrinth. He only got the general direction in which the two large monsters were moving. They were going west. After telling this to Nephise, there was pretty much nothing else for him to do. In the end, Sunny decided to simply rest. The next day was promising to be full of hardships and danger. So it was in his best interest to let his body recover as much as it could. Sometime later, Sunny was lying on his back, staring at the gray sky. Cassie was sitting beside him, lost in her thoughts. Nephise was meditating. At least, that's what it looked like. She might as well have been asleep for all Sunny knew. After a while, Cassie turned to him.
Sunny.
He tilted his head to look at her. He replied, "Yeah." The blind girl hesitated.
Do you think we'll be able to return home?
Sunny glanced at her and furrowed his brow. A few seconds later, he turned away and looked at the sky again.
Sure.
Cassie smiled.
You really think so? Why?
He wondered, what's with all these questions? He sighed and tried to find the right words.
Because of her.
He pointed at Nephise, knowing that Cassie won't see it. There was no one else on the stone platform, though, so it was pretty obvious who he was referring to.
I'm also not someone to die easily. In fact, I'm willing to bet that you couldn't have found a better duo of sleepers to escort you across the dream realm. If anyone can survive this, it's us. So, yeah, I think that our chances of making it back are pretty high.
Cassie suddenly giggled.
Aren't you a little too full of yourself? You were in the second to last place.
Sunny shrugged.
That's only because someone smart told me to keep a low profile. Otherwise, I would have ranked higher.
Then, with a grin, he added,
Much higher, third to last at least.
The blind girl couldn't help but laugh. The melodic sound of her laughter made Sunny feel much better. He had not heard anything like that ever since coming to the dream realm. It was nice to see that people were still able to preserve a bit of mirth even in this hellish place. Come to think of it, this was the first time he heard Cassie laugh at all. Back in the academy, she was always dull and bleak. After this sudden outburst, Cash's expression slowly turned wistful. A few seconds later, she asked,
"What do you miss the most about home?"
Sunny tried to think of something, but failed. He wasn't sure that he even had a home in the real world. The tiny room he had been renting previously was nothing but a temporary shelter from the rain. As for the real world as a whole, his life there wasn't that pleasant either. Finally, he said,
I don't particularly miss anything.
Cassie was very surprised.
"Really, don't you miss your family?"
Sunny smiled.
I don't have a family. Well, I guess I have a sister somewhere, but we haven't seen each other in many years.
Cassie gave a quiet. The blind girl fell silent. Several seconds later, she said quietly,
"I miss my family the most."
There was longing and sadness in her voice. Sunny didn't know what to say, so he stayed silent.
"Mom and Dad must be really worried about me right now." No, actually they wouldn't be worried. They would be heartbroken. They must think that I'm as well as dead already.
Sunny glanced at her and sighed.
You seem to care about them a lot.
Cassie turned to him in confusion.
Of course, isn't it normal?
Sunny stared at the gray sky. The wind smelled of rain. After a while, he said,
I wouldn't know.
In the evening, Nephi's made Sunny perform the 1,000 strikes again. After that, they ate the last strips of dried scavenger meat and took turns sleeping, so that one of them could always keep an eye on Cassie. Thankfully, nothing happened during the night. When the morning came and the dark sea retreated, they prepared to leave the giant statue. Nephi's was the first one to climb down. Before that, she had a few words to say.
Today will be different from before. There will be much more scavengers roaming in the labyrinth. We might not be able to create an ambush or avoid fighting several of them at once.
She looked at Sunny.
If anything happens, your job is to bring Cassie away. We can retreat by using passages that are too narrow for the scavengers. If we get separated, proceed to the high point by yourselves. Don't wait for me. Do you understand?
With a somber expression, he gave her a nod. Nephi's returned it.
Good. Time is of the essence, so let's go.
That she began the descent. After Nephi's reached a point 20 or so meters below them, she found purchase and waited. Using the golden rope, Sunny lowered Cassie down. Just like while climbing up, they took turns helping the blind girl. Luckily, climbing down the statue was much easier. Soon, they reached the ground. Entering the labyrinth, the trio moved forward with haste. The shadow was ahead of them, scouting for monsters and optimal paths. Despite that, their progress was slow and chaotic. They had to constantly change direction to avoid groups of scavengers, often ending up in dead ends or moving further away from their destination. Sunny, who played the role of the scout and navigator, felt his brain slowly starting to boil. At some point, however, they inevitably ended up in a situation where a fight was unavoidable. There was a large group of scavengers at their heels, and a pair of them blocking the path ahead. Neither of the two groups had noticed the sleepers yet, however. Since there were no other passages to turn into, it was only a matter of time. Nephi's considered their options for a few seconds. There was a scowl on her face. Finally, she said,
If there's only two, we can take them.
Sunny looked at her with uncertainty in his eyes.
But there's no time to set up an ambush.
He wasn't quite sure how they could fight two scavengers at once. Despite how good of a teacher Nephi's was, he only practiced with the sword for a day. Facing against a scavenger alone was risky. Changing Star shrugged.
It's almost the same. I'll attack first. You follow behind in the shadows and finish one off once they turn. Then we kill the second one together.
The whole plan was based on the assumption that Nephi's could survive under the onslaught of two scavengers, both attacking her simultaneously. Sunny was very impressed by her prowess, but he wasn't sure that it was possible. There was a large probability that Nephis would die. He still remembered that she wasn't present in Cassie's first vision. But what else could they do? A bit rattled, Sonny gritted his teeth.
All right.
After a short pause, Nephis summoned her sword. Then she stepped forward. After finding a good hiding spot for Cassie, Sonny and Nephis proceeded forward to face the scavengers. Soon, they saw two hulking silhouettes in the distance. With her lips pursed together, Nephis threw the words over her shoulder, telling him to keep up. Then, like a runner preparing for a race, she got down on one knee, inhaled deeply, and lunged forward. Sonny cursed under his breath. Sonny dove into the deep shadow cast by the wall of the labyrinth and followed, running as fast as he could. However, the distance between them kept growing. Suddenly, he remembered walking behind Nephis as they crossed the bridge to the academy. Was it his fate to always follow behind her? Changing Star's running speed was incredibly fast. She was practically flying through the air like an arrow let loose from a bow. One of her arms was stretched backward, holding the sword with its point to the ground. The other was cutting the air with each stride. It took the two scavengers a couple of seconds to realize what was happening after noticing her. By that time, she was almost upon them, with madness burning in their eyes and viscous saliva dripping from their mandibles. Monsters screeched and charged forward. Nephis did not slow down, as though planning to ram them with her body. Sonny's heart skipped a beat. 4 terrifying pincers shot through the air. At the last moment, Nephis fell backward, falling on her side. The inertia carried her forward as she slid through the mud, passing between the scavengers. Then she twisted her body and stopped herself by plunging the sword into the ground. A bit slower, and she would have been impaled by one of the scavengers' legs. Sonny gasped that she was crazy, absolutely crazy. By the time Changing Star got back to her feet, one of the scavengers had already turned around. However, Sonny couldn't see what was going on as his sight was blocked by the bulky carapace creatures. He only heard the sound of chitin striking against steel. There was no time to worry about that anyway, since he had his own problems to solve, due to the insane maneuver that Nephis had pulled off. The second scavenger lagged a little behind the first one. It was just about to turn around when Sonny finally got close enough to launch an attack. Silently cursing, he ran up a narrow protrusion on the coral wall and jumped, aiming to pierce the weak point at the scavenger's back from above. His shadow was already wrapped around the azure blade. But at the last moment, the scavenger suddenly moved, slightly turning its torso to the right. The blade missed the concave spot where the armor plates connected and instead hit one of them square in the center, sliding helplessly across adamantine chitin. Sonny spat a sharp curse. Instead of killing the beast with one decisive blow, Sonny ended up dealing no damage at all. What's worse, he landed right on top of the scavenger, practically hugging it from behind. In the next moment, the scavenger shook its carapace, throwing the irritating human off. Sonny flew sideways and crashed into the labyrinth wall, feeling breath being knocked out of him. Suffocating and disoriented, he fell gracelessly into the mud, muttering that this was not good. By some instinct, Sonny rolled to the side. Something tore past him and hit the wall, sending pieces of crimson coral flying through the air. Then he was lifted into the air and thrown backward. But by that time, however, he had already come to his senses, twisting his body. Sonny managed to land on his feet and take a few steps back without falling. In the next second, his sword was in front of him, held in both hands just like Nephis had taught him. The scavenger was already charging at him with a menacing fire burning in its eyes. Sonny muttered about repetition and experience. The shadow flowed from the azure blade to his hand, then spread to his arm, shoulder, and then finally covered his whole body. Sonny instantly felt stronger, faster, more resilient. But was it enough? No, to survive, he would definitely also need some luck. One pincer flew at him from the right, the other from the left. There was no time to retreat or dodge sideways, so instead Sonny did something that made every instinct in his body scream in protest. He jumped forward, closing the distance to the charging monster. The pincers clashed together with a loud crack behind his back. Instinct or not, it was the only logical step. After all, the attack range of his sword was much shorter than that of the scavenger. He could only fight back by getting close. Before the beast had time to react, Sonny did what he had recently done thousands of times. His muscles moved even before his mind gave the command. With one fluid motion, he raised the sword over his head and slashed downward, pushing with one hand while pulling with the other. His whole body moved in concert to deliver a powerful blow. The azure blade whistled as it cut the air. Then it hit the joint of one of the scavenger's front legs and cleaved right through it, severing the limb entirely. Blue blood sprayed everywhere. Sonny had less than a second to be amazed. He breathed out in disbelief that he had actually done it, but there was no time to be distracted. Due to the loss of its front leg, the scavenger lost balance for a moment, careening forward and down. However, he had 7 other legs. This wasn't going to last long. Coincidentally, though, at this exact moment, his other front leg slid in the mud, bringing the monster even further down. Sonny did not waste this chance. Taking a step forward, he thrust the azure blade up, pushing it into the scavenger's mouth. A severed mandible fell to the ground as the monster impaled itself on the sword with its own weight. The massive body of the nightmare creature convulsed before falling still. It was dead. Sonny slowly exhaled. Only now feeling the pain in his chest and at the back of his head, he carefully touched it and grimaced. His hand came back wet with blood. He muttered that at least he was alive.
You have slain an awakened beast, Carapace Scavenger. Your shadow grows stronger. You have.
With no time to listen to the spell, Sonny tugged on the sword to dislodge it from the monster's head and hurried to help Nephi's. However, it was too late. The other scavenger was lying in the mud, clearly dead. His limbs were still twitching, indicating that the fatal blow was delivered just moments ago. It seemed like Nephi's had managed to sever its spine by piercing the weak spot at the base of the beast's torso with her longsword. He couldn't see the silver-haired girl behind the bulky carcass. Sonny approached it. He heard the sound of rugged, strained breathing. Then a shaky voice came from behind the scavenger, and Nephi stammered, telling him not to come any closer. In the deathly silence of the battle's aftermath, Changing Star's voice sounded strange and subdued. Sonny suddenly felt as though someone had squeezed his heart in a fist. Steeling himself, he took another step forward. Nephi's was standing in front of the dead scavenger, trying to catch her breath after the intense fight. There was a bloody gash on her shoulder. However, it didn't look life-threatening. Sonny's attention, though, was instantly drawn to something else. It seemed that at some point during the fight, the tall girl's makeshift seaweed top came apart, leaving her naked above the waist. She was covering her chest with one arm. Behind the arm squished the supple fullness of her. Sonny flinched as though someone had stung him and hurriedly turned around. His face was burning. Without thinking about it, he even made his shadow look away. An awkward silence followed. After some time, Sonny forced himself to speak and asked if she was all right. Nephi's was slow to answer, but eventually said yes. Sonny replied that was good and stammered that he would go fetch Cassie then. Nephi's agreed quietly, feeling as though an army of monsters was chasing him. He walked forward on stiff legs and then quickened his step, barely holding himself from running, insisting it was her fault, entirely her fault, and that she should have communicated things clearer.
Her fault, it's her fault. She should have communicated things clearer.
Trying to get the vivid image out of his head, Sonny hurried to the place where Cassie was waiting for them. By the time they returned, Nephi's had already fixed her top and was wearing it as though nothing had happened. However, Sonny couldn't help but feel that the look she gave him was somewhat weird. He muttered to himself to forget it. After checking the wound on his head, Changing Star said it was just a bleeder, nothing serious, and told him to let her know if he felt dizzy and nauseous or had a strong headache. Since Sonny had none of these symptoms, he kept quiet. Nephi's looked down at his clothes and sighed, asking about the memory. He opened his mouth to say no, but then fell silent. Come to think of it, when he killed the scavenger, the spell did say something else after informing him about the absorbed shadow fragments. At the time, he was too busy to pay it any attention. Sonny said he would check. He summoned the runes and quickly found the cluster representing his memories. Memories, Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Azure Blade. Sonny gave a thoughtful hum and said there was nothing new. Then what was the spell talking about? Suddenly, he noticed a new set of runes in the neighboring cluster. His eyes widened. Echoes, Carapace Scavenger. Sunny murmured that it was an echo. Sunny couldn't believe his eyes. Echoes were an extremely rare type of reward that Awakened could receive after slaying nightmare creatures. Chances of getting one were very low. In the real world, an echo could be sold for an unimaginable amount of money. That's because they were much more precious than memories. Without delaying it much further, he dove into his sea of soul. There, very few things had changed. A lonely black sun was still hanging above the calm. Silent waters. It was orbited by spheres of light that represented his memories. This time, there were 3 of them. Just like before, Sunny couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was stealthily moving just beyond the periphery of his vision. However, this time, he didn't pay it any attention. He wanted to see his echo. It too was represented by a sphere of light. However, this sphere was much larger and hovered further away from the shadow core. With a thought, he commanded it to descend. The sphere slowly floated down and touched the dark water. As Sunny came closer, walking on the surface of the sea, its radiance slowly faded away, revealing the monster contained within. A hulking, menacing Carapace Scavenger was calmly standing in front of him. There was no madness in its eyes, or any feeling at all for that matter. After all, it wasn't really alive. It was just an echo. Shining runes appeared in the air around the scavenger.
Echo Carapace Scavenger, Echo Type Beast, Echo Core Awakened, Echo Attribute Strong Armored, Echo Description Accursed Soldier of the Fallen Legion.
Before Sunny knew it, a wide grin appeared on his face. That scavenger was now his. It could be summoned and used to fight against his enemies, carry heavy cargo, or perform other tasks. What's more, it was a whole rank above its master, which meant that it was much stronger, more resilient and fearsome than a dreamer with a dormant core should normally possess. With this echo by their side, many things would become easier. Following an impulse, Sunny raised a hand and brushed it against cold, black chitin. He just wanted to touch his new possession. However, the moment his palm touched the scavenger, a strange thing happened. The soul of sea suddenly surged a little, and a new set of runes appeared.
Transform Echo into a shadow.
Sunny flinched and snatched his hand back, demanding to know what the hell that was about. He had never heard anything about transforming echoes into something else, let alone shadows. Then again, he had never heard about shadow cores and fragments too. Sunny mused that it seemed his aspect held more secrets than he had thought. Sunny licked his lips and hesitated. Then he cautiously said yes. However, nothing happened. A moment later, the runes changed.
Not enough shadow fragments to perform a transformation. Shadow fragments required, 24,100.
He frowned, disappointed. Sunny grumbled that he saw, so there was another use for the fragments. They could either enhance his own core or do something weird to echoes. He wondered how he was supposed to know which use was more beneficial without knowing what a transformation actually did. An echo was plenty useful by itself. Sunny felt that it would be wiser to concentrate on strengthening himself, at least for now. He muttered that he would experiment with it later. With that, he left the Sea of Soul. Since he had spaced out for quite a bit, Nephi's was looking at him with a silent question in her eyes. Sunny grinned and said he got an echo. Her pupils slightly widened. Cassie, on the other hand, was more expressive, exclaiming that he had actually gotten an echo. Sunny confirmed that he had. Since the larger group of monsters was now minutes away from catching up with them, Sunny didn't waste any time and summoned the scavenger. The hulking beast immediately appeared in front of him, seemingly sewn together from tiny sparks of light. Soon, its black chitin became fully corporeal. Following Sunny's command, it shifted a little and raised its mighty pincers. Nephi's observed the echo with an unreadable expression. Then a corner of her lips slightly curled up. Nephi said good. Sunny looked at her with a smile and said he thought they could task it with carrying Cassie. Outside of battle, it would help them the most. The blind girl's mouth fell open. Cassie stammered, asking if he meant to carry her like a mount. He chuckled and slapped the scavenger on its carapace. Sunny said that this bad boy could fit a petite girl like her with no problem at all. He told her to trust him, that he had been clambering on these things a lot for the past few days. It was actually quite spacious on top of them, especially if they were not trying to kill you. Cassie hesitated, then said, well, okay. If he thought it was for the best. Sunny and Nephi's helped the blind girl to climb on top of the echo. Then, they used the golden rope to create makeshift reins for Cassie to hold onto. After quickly retrieving soul shards from the dead scavengers, the sleepers hastily left the passage, narrowly avoiding another battle. With Cassie riding comfortably atop the scavenger, their overall speed dramatically increased. Sunny and Nephi's were jogging in the front, hoping to recoup the time lost in the first half of the day and reach the high point with an hour or two to spare. From time to time, they had to take detours to avoid fighting groups of carapace monsters. However, with a monster of their own by their side, the mood and mental state of the three sleepers were much better. For the first time since coming to this place, Sunny felt somewhat calm. Of course, this calmness didn't last long. At some point, he noticed that the wind had picked up a bit. Almost simultaneously, Cassie asked them to stop. Nephi's and Sunny looked at her with deep frowns. It seemed that they both had a bad premonition. Sunny asked what it was. The blind girl let go of the reins. Cassie asked whether they could hear anything. They looked at each other, then shook their heads. Sunny replied no and asked why. Cassie scowled. She said to help her get off this thing. After they helped her, she stood motionless for a while, listening. Her scowl deepened. Then the blind girl cautiously kneeled and put her ear to the ground. Sunny asked what she could hear. Cassie licked her lips. She said it was murmuring. Suddenly, a drop of water fell on Sunny's face. He raised his head and looked at the sky. There, dark, stormy clouds were gathering with unnatural speed. Pretty soon, they were bound to cover it completely, including the sun, and when that happened, his eyes widened. Sunny said they needed to move now. As Nephi's turned to him, Sunny grabbed Cassie and helped her stand up. His face was even paler than usual, and there was a panicked look in his eyes. Sunny shouted at her to help him get Cassie back on the scavenger now. The silver-haired girl raised her head and looked at the sky. Soon her expression darkened. Without saying anything, she did as he had asked. Cassie seemed a bit disoriented. She grabbed the reins and helplessly turned to her friend, asking Neph what was going on. Changing Star glanced at her. When she eventually spoke, her voice sounded heavy. Nephi said that a storm was coming. Meanwhile, Sunny sent his shadow to climb on top of a tall pillar of coral and looked ahead, trying to understand how far the cliffs they were aiming for were. From the look of it, there was still a considerable distance to go. However, the giant statue was already much further away. Going back now would have been suicide. He turned to Nephi's and said they were about 3 or 4 kilometers away from the cliffs and asked whether she thought they could make it. She scowled. Nephi's replied that if they took the most direct route, maybe. Sunny hesitated, then asked about the monsters. Changing Star looked ahead and gritted her teeth. Nephi said they would have to cut through. Sunny shot back, asking if that was it, if that was the plan, as he was fruitlessly trying to come up with some devious trick to save them. Nephi's turned her head and glanced at him, puzzled. Nephi's demanded to know what he was waiting for and told him to run. As they darted forward, heavy drops of rain were starting to fall on the ground. Strong winds were howling between the coral blades, sending bits of mud and seaweed flying. With storm clouds gathering in the sky, sunlight dimmed, and a cold twilight descended upon the labyrinth. Sunny was running with all his might, as though his life depended on it, because it actually did. He was leading their small group, choosing the straightest path toward the cliffs with the help of his shad. Nephi's was a step behind him. The scavenger carrying Cassie was stomping through the mud with its 8 legs in the back. Without the need to avoid monsters and with death breathing down their necks, they moved with amazing speed. Side passages and crimson walls were flashing past them in a blur. There was no need to hold back and conserve strength for the long run. If they were late to reach the cliffs by a minute, their lives would be over. They had to give it their all. Sunny was ready to fight a series of bloody skirmishes all along the way, but to his surprise, the inhabitants of the labyrinth did not give them much trouble. The scavengers seemed to be as panicked as they were. The bulky beasts were busy trying to hide inside the coral mounds or burrowing underground. On the rare occasions when one of them showed aggression, a quick slash of the sword or a threatening clack of a pincer was enough to make the monster change its mind. However, no matter how fast they were moving, the storm was faster. The rain quickly turned into a pelting downpour, each drop becoming a torrent. The winds grew in strength, striking against their bodies with enough force to make them stumble. The light dimmed even further, reducing visibility to almost zero. Finally, a blinding bolt of lightning tore through the darkness, followed almost immediately by a deafening thunderclap. In the next moment, the ground under Sunny's feet trembled, causing him to lose balance and fall. He rolled in the mud and tried to stand up but slipped and fell again. Someone's arm grabbed him by the shoulder and helped him rise. In the darkness of the storm, Sunny saw changing Star's face. She opened her mouth and shouted at him not to stop, to run. He almost couldn't hear her behind the roaring wind and rain. By the time Sunny began to move, the dark, salty water was already as high as his shins. He gritted his teeth. The sea was coming back. He couldn't determine where the water was coming from, but with each minute, it was rising higher. Soon it was up to his knee, then up to his waist, making running almost impossible. The speed of the group slowed down considerably. It was then in a sudden flash of lightning when they saw a dark mass of stone ahead. They had made it to the cliffs. Almost at the same time, a terrible rumbling sound came from the depths of the labyrinth. Turning back, Sunny saw a colossal, crushing torrent of black water rushing through the crimson forest. Some distance away, a tardy scavenger was caught by it and thrown against the coral walls. The unbreakable carapace of the mighty creature cracked and burst open like a rotten egg. Sunny spat a sharp curse. He turned to Nephise and shouted that time was up to start climbing. She caught him by the arm. Nephise said to dismiss his echo. Sunny didn't know whether the scavenger could scale the cliff. In any case, Cassie wouldn't have been able to hold on if it did. He helped the blind girl get down and then sent the monster back to the Sea of Soul. Nephise lowered herself to let Cassie climb on her back, then tied them together with the golden rope. Not wasting any time, she gritted her teeth and stepped forward to grab onto the wet rocks of the cliff wall. They began the ascent, rushing to get as high as possible before the black torrent hit. Some time later, Sunny screamed for them to brace. In the next moment, a wall of dark water hit the rocks mere meters beneath their feet. As Sunny held for dear life, the whole cliff shuddered. A few boulders fell from somewhere high above, missing his head only by chance. Somehow, all three of them were still alive. However, things were far from being over. The black water was still rising, now with frightening speed, threatening to swallow them at any second. They had to keep climbing, and they had to be faster than the surging sea. Sunny cursed as he searched for the next hold to grab onto. To survive, he had to scale the face of the cliff with crazy speed. However, hastily climbing wet rocks was a recipe for disaster. One slip of a hand and he would plunge down to be crushed against the cliff, drown, or be eaten by some giant monster. The torrential rain and hurricane wind made everything even worse. And yet, there was no choice. He frantically kept climbing, tearing his skin on sharp rocks. Every muscle in his body was in agony. If not for the shadow wrapped tightly around his body, Sunny would have been long dead. But even with its help, the surging dark water was getting closer and closer. Sunny cursed again and again, damning it all. No matter how hard Sunny tried, he couldn't win back any distance. Soon, the water was at his feet. The sea slowly swallowed his legs, then his torso. He kept climbing, now fighting against the weight of the water and the force of the tide that was trying to tear him away from the cliff. But it was useless in the end. When the water covered his shoulders, he felt his fingers slipping from the wet rocks. Sunny tried to hold on, but the current was too strong. He was pushed away like a weightless toy, losing any purchase. Sunny cried out no. In the last second, a golden rope fell into the water beside him. Shaken, Sunny grabbed onto it and held with all his strength. The rope drew tight and lifted him out of the water. His feet touched the cliff wall again. Not wasting any time, he resumed climbing with the help of the rope. Finally, a strong hand grabbed him from above and dragged his body over the edge of the cliff. Sunny fell to the ground, struggling to breathe. After some time, he looked at Nephise, who was lying in a similar position to his right, equally as drained. She was still clutching the golden rope in her hand. Cassie was sitting a few steps away from them. He wanted to laugh, but had no strength for it. They survived. For a few minutes, Sunny simply lay on the ground, letting the rain hit his face. From time to time, a bolt of lightning arced through the skies, drowning everything in blinding light. Other than that, it was almost completely dark. If not for his attribute, he would have had trouble discerning the shapes of Nephise and Cassie, who were resting nearby. After some time, however, a feeling of uneasiness entered his mind. Something was off. Sunny scowled, trying to understand where that feeling was coming from. Finally, he realized that it was his shadow. It was trying to draw his attention to something. Sunny groaned, pleading to be allowed to rest, saying he just wanted to rest. He was too tired to do anything. Both his body and mind were exhausted. However, the shadow was very persistent. It remained adamant. In the end, Sunny moaned and rolled over on his stomach, then slowly stood up. Nephise turned her head and looked at him. Nephise asked what it was. He grimaced. Sunny said he didn't know yet, but that something felt wrong. Cassie shivered and got closer to Neph. Following his shadow's warning, Sunny looked around, trying to find any sign of danger in their surroundings. Even with his vision, he couldn't see anything out of place. The upper part of the cliffs was well above the stormy sea, forming a small island. Its surface was rugged and uneven, with several protruding ridges breaking the line of sight. There was a large space between their group and the nearest ridge. That space was littered seemingly at random with piles of dirt and tall boulders. Nephise got up and summoned her sword. Nephise asked whether he could see anything. Sunny frowned. Sunny replied not really. At that moment, another lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the small island. His eyes widened. The tall boulders surrounding them were massive and irregularly shaped. They were black in color and motionless. That's why Sunny had not recognized them for what they were at first glance. All around them, scavengers were silently lying on the ground. Sunny froze, suddenly consumed by terror. The hairs on the back of his neck bristled and stood up on ends. 1, 2, 3. He lost count because of panic and gritted his teeth. 7. No, 8 of them. It seemed the 3 humans were not the only ones who thought of taking shelter from the dark sea on these cliffs. He trembled. These cliffs were a death trap. Noticing something on his face, Nephise tensed and said his name. He slowly turned his head to her and whispered for her not to speak, not to move, and to just stay where she was. She followed his instructions without asking for the reason. However, a silent question appeared on her face. Cassie did the same. Sunny closed his eyes and breathed in, trying to calm his panicking mind down. There were no hopeless situations. Every problem had a solution. He just had to think of one. The scavengers did not attack yet. Maybe they were asleep or patiently waiting out the storm, trying not to move in fear of attracting more terrifying monsters. Maybe they simply did not notice the humans. After all, it was unknown how well these creatures could see. Were they able to see in the dark? Probably not, or at least not as well as he could. There was still hope. Sunny opened his eyes and looked at the small island again. But this time, his perspective was different. He saw the deep darkness, the clamor of the storm that drowned out most of the sounds, the large distance between the scavengers. This was his territory. It was perfectly suited for a murderous shadow. Didn't he dream of becoming a silent assassin? Well, here was his chance. He just had to execute each step perfectly. Crawl through the darkness, strike without alerting the enemy, kill each of them with one precise blow, rinse and repeat. He already knew their strengths and weaknesses. All that was left was to put that knowledge to practice. And even if he made a mistake, there were other means to fall back on. Echo and Nephise could do their part if he were to land himself in danger. Yes, that could work. It had to. Sunny looked at Changing Star and Cassie. Sunny said he would take care of this. Before they could react, he seemed to dissolve into the shadows. Under the cover of darkness, Sunny sneaked forward. His steps were soft and measured, his breathing controlled. He quickly determined the optimal order of attack to minimize the chance of being discovered and proceeded to the first target, a hulking scavenger that was the furthest away from the pack. Hidden in the shadows, Sunny suddenly felt calm and focused. He felt as though he was finally in his natural element. As the looming silhouette of the scavenger approached, he slowed down and circled around his target. The monster did not move. Oblivious to the lurking threat that was drawing closer with each second, Sunny held his breath and prepared to attack. He only had one chance. Sunny hissed at himself to do it right. With that thought, he silently lunged forward. 1 step, 2. Sunny jumped and easily landed on the monster's carapace. The azure blade was already in his hand, its steel dark. A moment later, it plunged into the weak point on the scavenger's back, piercing the chitin and destroying its brain. The quiet crack of the breaking carapace was quickly washed away by the rain. It was done. Sunny felt a sense of triumph appear in his heart and quickly suppressed it. This wasn't the right time to celebrate. 7 targets were still waiting for him in the darkness. He retrieved his sword and jumped down from the scavenger's corpse. Then, Sunny frowned. Why was the spell silent? It didn't announce his kill, nor the absorption of the shadow fragments. Feeling his skin crawl, Sunny turned around and looked at the scavenger. At first, he was afraid that the beast was still alive. But that wasn't the case. It was as dead as could be. However, on closer inspection, Sunny noticed something that he had missed before. And when he did, his face paled.